Today, we delve into a chilling case from Naples, Florida, in January 2005. A young man's dreams were abruptly ended in a scheme fueled by obsession, envy, and an intense longing for youth. Ethan Wright was a 20-year-old college student thriving in Naples, a locale renowned for its lively retirees, seasonal visitors, and the hidden lives of young individuals who cater to them. Ethan was enthusiastic about coffee and aspired to own his own cafe someday. Known among friends for his deep interest in coffee culture, he loved crafting new blends and perfecting his brewing techniques. Ethan was enrolled at a local community college, focusing on business management to pave the way for his cafe dreams. He worked part-time as a barista at a popular local coffee shop, where his innovative creations were starting to get noticed for their unique flavors, often challenging Maple's preference for traditional brews. Ethan was well regarded by his peers, celebrated for his amiable nature, and his knack for making those around him feel at ease. His engaging personality wasn't just a hit with his friends. He also charmed the older clientele at high-end coffee tasting events, where his skills were in high demand. Ethan was bold and spirited, always on the lookout for new connections and adventures in life, love, and especially in coffee. In the days leading up to his tragic end, Ethan was thrilled about a new opportunity to showcase his latest coffee blend at one of Maple's premier events. His excitement was palpable in every discussion with friends and colleagues. He aimed to carve out a name for himself in the bustling cafe scene and saw this event as a breakthrough. Ethan harbored grand ambitions. He dreamed of traveling the world to explore diverse coffee cultures and someday competing in national barista competitions. He even mused about moving to Seattle to immerse himself in its famed coffee scene. Yet, all his aspirations were halted by a sinister plot that unfolded unnoticed. On the morning of January 15, 2005, Maples was just starting to stir under a clear, cool dawn. Around 8 a.m., Ethan Wright's roommate, Alex Reed, sensed that something was amiss. Ethan hadn't left for his early shift at the local coffee shop, which was out of character. Ethan was usually up with the first light, ready to embrace the day. Alex, concerned, tapped on Ethan's bedroom door, but got no reply. Deciding to check, what he discovered would forever be imprinted in his memory. Ethan lay on his bed, motionless, his skin pale and lifeless. The room, typically filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee or experimental blends, was now unsettlingly silent, marked by a faint, distressing odor. No signs of struggle were evident, no furniture appended or items displaced. It appeared as though Ethan had simply drifted off to sleep and never awakened. Shock rooted Alex to the spot as he stared in disbelief. Panic quickly set in. He scrambled for his phone and dialed 911, his voice breaking as he shakily recounted finding his best friend unresponsive. When the paramedics arrived, they confirmed Alex's worst fears. Ethan was dead. Police soon followed, their sirens cutting through the morning quiet, the flashing lights casting eerie shadows inside the modest apartment. The scene felt surreal, the morning's tranquility shattered by the stark reality of death. Alex, overwhelmed by shock, struggled to grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. The responding officers gently urged him out to start their inquiry. Later at the police station, he was visibly distraught, unable to fathom the enormity of his loss. Ethan's body was transported to the local medical examiner for an autopsy as the investigation into his enigmatic death commenced. Unbeknownst to all, this was merely the start of a complex, sinister tale. The Naples Police Department responded swiftly to the 911 call from Ethan Wright's apartment on the morning of January 15, 2005. Leading the charge was Detective James McCarthy, a veteran officer known for his thorough investigative skills. The scene at Ethan's apartment was eerily silent. Everything appeared untouched, and Ethan's body lay peacefully, hinting at an unnatural cause of death. As McCarthy and his team entered Ethan's bedroom, the absence of visible violence struck them. No blood, no weapons, no signs of a struggle. Ethan appeared to have simply fallen asleep and not woken up. However, upon closer inspection, Detective McCarthy grew suspicious of more sinister undertone. Ethan's pale complexion and the slight bluish hue around his lips suggested possible poisoning. The team meticulously documented the scene, photographing every detail from the neatly kept bed to the half-drunk cup of coffee on the nightstand. They collected potential evidence, including Dr. Cameron immediately requested a full toxicology report to pinpoint the substance responsible for Ethan's sudden demise. The investigation widened as police questioned Alex Reed, Ethan's roommate, who, though still in shock, provided full cooperation. Alex recounted Ethan's recent activities, highlighting his excitement and Sophia had spent the morning at the restaurant, finalizing preparations for a big dinner service. David had left early, mumbling something about running errands and meeting a friend for coffee. As Sophia drove home, her mind filled with last-minute thoughts about the evening's menu, she decided on a whim to stop by her mother's bookstore for a quick chat. Perhaps a cup of tea and a familiar face would soothe her anxious mind. But as she turned onto the quiet street leading to Maggie's shop, her heart froze. There, tucked away behind the bookstore, was David's car. For a moment, Sophia sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to convince herself there was an innocent reason for his presence. But deep down, she already knew the truth. With trembling legs, Sophia approached her mother's bookstore. The curtains were mostly drawn, but through a small gap, she could see movement inside. Steeling herself with a deep breath, she quietly unlocked the door with her spare key and pushed it open as silently as she could. The scene that met her eyes would be etched in her mind forever. On a cozy, well-worn leather couch, David and Maggie were locked in an intimate embrace, completely unaware of the world outside. Maggie's usually tidy hair was tousled, and David's shirt was partly unbuttoned. On the small coffee table, 2 half-empty cups of tea stood as silent witnesses to their betrayal. For a moment, Sophia felt time stop. Then, as if sensing her presence, David and Maggie looked up, their faces a mix of shock, guilt, and something close to defiance. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions and accusation. Sophia's anguished cry shattered the silence, jolting the guilty pair out of their daze. David stumbled to his feet, stammering out half-formed excuses and pleas. Maggie stayed seated, her face drained of color, tears streaking down her cheeks. Sophia, her voice raw with pain and fury, hurled question after question at them. When they finally spoke, the truth cut like a knife. 6 months. It had started as innocent conversations, then slowly turned into something more. They claimed they never intended for it to go this far. They said they were sorry, but Sophia couldn't bear to hear another word. She fled the bookstore, got into her car, and drove aimlessly for hours, the devastating scene replaying in her mind over and over. By the time she returned home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long, haunting shadows across the lawn of the house she once thought was her safe haven. As she sat alone in the darkened living room, surrounded by the remnants of her once perfect life, something inside her shattered. The pain, the betrayal, the sheer weight of it all. In that darkness, a cold resolve took shape. Someone had to pay for this betrayal, and Sophia knew exactly who it would be. The events that led to the final confrontation unfolded over the course of several tense hours on that warm summer evening. Sophia, having spent the day drowning in grief and fury, found herself pacing the hallways of her home like a restless spirit. The ticking clock in the living room seemed to taunt her, marking the minutes until everything in her world would change forever. As twilight settled, David returned home. His usual confident stride was replaced with hesitant steps, as though he knew what awaited him. Sophia watched him from the shadows as he hung up his jacket and loosened his tie, the familiar routine now stained by the knowledge of his betrayal. David called out her name, his voice tinged with anxiety. When she finally stepped into view, he visibly recoiled. The woman standing before him was nothing like the vibrant, loving wife he had once known. Sophia's eyes were bloodshot and hollow, her posture stiff with barely suppressed rage. David, his face twisted with guilt and desperation, launched into a flurry of excuses and apologies. He talked about feeling neglected, about the stress of work and the weight of their struggles. He insisted that the affair was a mistake, a lapse in judgment that spiraled out of control. But with every word he spoke, Sophia's anger grew, a storm of rage building within her. Before she knew what she was doing, Sophia found herself walking to David's study. She knew he kept a heavy decorative bookend there, an ornate piece he had picked up from a local shop. In a daze, she grabbed it, feeling its cold weight in her hands. When she returned to the living room, David's eyes widened in fear. He raised his hands, backing away slowly, his voice rising in panic as he promised to end the affair, to go to counseling, to do anything to save their marriage. But Sophia barely registered his word. All she could see was the image of David and Maggie, locked in that embrace, playing in an endless loop in her mind. What happened next was a blur of movement and chaos. David took a step forward, perhaps intending to stop her, But in the rush of heightened emotions, Sophia swung the heavy decorative bookend in her hand. The sickening thud as it connected with David's shoulder echoed through the room, followed by the sound of shattering glass as a framed photo fell from a nearby shelf. David stumbled backward, a look of shock and pain etched on his face. He clutched his shoulder where the impact had left a deep bruise, his white shirt now smeared with blood from a cut caused by the broken glass. Gasping for breath, David's eyes locked onto Sophia's, silently pleading for the woman he once knew. As the reality of what she had done set in, Sophia dropped the bookend. It hit the floor with a dull thud, snapping her out of her trance. Her fury melted away, replaced by sheer horror and regret. She rushed to David's side, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the wound she had inflicted. His breathing was labored, his face drained of color. Fighting back tears, Sophia fumbled for her phone and dialed the emergency number, her voice cracking as she gave the dispatcher the address, begging for an ambulance. While she waited for help, Sophia cradled David's head in her lap, murmuring a desperate mix of apologies and pleas for him to stay with her. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Neighbors, having heard the commotion, began gathering outside. Through the window, Sophia could see their concerned faces morph into expressions of shock as they realized what had happened. She overheard muffled conversations, someone mentioning the police. When the paramedics finally arrived, they moved swiftly to stabilize David. Sophia stood back, numb with disbelief, as they lifted him onto a stretcher and hurried him to the waiting ambulance. The wail of the sirens gradually faded, leaving her standing alone in the silent, tension-filled house, surrounded by the aftermath of her actions. It wasn't long before the police arrived. Detective Carla Reyes took charge of the scene, her sharp eyes scanning every detail as officers cordoned off the area and began collecting evidence. Approaching Sophia, who sat motionless on the stained couch, Detective Reyes spoke in a calm but firm voice, informing Sophia of her rights and asking if she understood what had just occurred. With a voice barely above a whisper, Sophia recounted the day's events, the devastating discovery of the affair, the confrontation, and the moment everything spiraled out of control. Her words were detached, as though she were recounting a story that had happened to someone else. As Sophia was led away and handcuffed, the enormity of the situation began to sink in. She caught glimpses of neighbors peering out from behind curtains, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. At the local hospital, David lay in critical condition, his injury far worse than it initially seemed. The blow had caused significant internal damage, and as he underwent surgery after surgery, friends and colleagues gathered in the waiting room, their whispered conversations filled with shock and speculation. Maggie, overcome with guilt and shame, tried to visit David, but was turned away by the hospital staff at his request. She retreated to her apartment above the bookstore, where she isolated herself, refusing to answer calls or see anyone. The weight of what she had caused left her looking years older, her once lively eyes now hollow and filled with sorrow. Detective Reyes dug deeper into the events that led up to that fateful night. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and family members, piecing together the tangled web of relationships and secrets that had unraveled so violently. The more she learned about the Chambers family's strained history and the affair between David and Maggie, the more complicated the case became. As the investigation moved forward, the town of Seabrook found itself divided. What initially seemed like a straightforward case of assault in a fit of rage was now viewed as a tragic consequence of betrayal and broken trust. Some residents felt sympathy for Sophia's situation, while others condemned her actions as unforgivable, no matter the circumstances. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source. Sophia's close friend and fellow chef, Lisa, stepped forward with a series of text messages. In the weeks leading up to the confrontation, Sophia had confided in Lisa about her growing suspicions, sharing the signs of infidelity she had noticed. The messages revealed Sophia's emotional turmoil and her struggle to accept the truth, providing valuable insight into her mental state leading up to the incident. Inside the packed courtroom, tension hung in the air as the judge called the proceedings to order. The prosecution, led by the ambitious District Attorney Vincent Harding, portrayed Sophia as a vengeful woman who had committed a premeditated act of violence. Harding argued that the assault was not a crime of passion, but a calculated attempt to punish both her husband and her mother for their betrayal. Sophia's defense attorney, Carla Morales, presented a different narrative. She painted Sophia as a victim of unbearable circumstances, a woman pushed to the edge by a betrayal that shattered her world. Morales emphasized Sophia's impeccable reputation, her dedication to her community, and the extreme emotional distress she had been under when she lashed out. In their closing statements, both sides made passionate appeals to the jury. Harding focused on the severity of the crime and the need for justice, while Morales urged the jury to consider the extraordinary situation and Sophia's otherwise exemplary life. As the jury left to deliberate, a hush fell over the courtroom. The fate of Sophia Reynolds now rested in their hands, and with it, the resolution of a tragedy that had rocked the quiet town of Seabrook. After 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Sophia Reynolds guilty of aggravated assault, a lesser charge than the attempted murder the prosecution sought. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of gasps and murmurs as the verdict was read, with Sophia standing quietly beside her attorney. The judge, considering Sophia's unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Additionally, Sophia was required to undergo psychological counseling and complete an anger management program. The sentence drew mixed reactions. Some believed it was too lenient given the harm caused, while others felt it was a fair balance of justice and empathy. As Sophia was led away from the courtroom, the gravity of her actions and the long road ahead seemed to settle on her shoulder. David, having recovered from his injuries but forever changed by the experience, moved to a different state to start fresh. He and Sophia divorced during her incarceration, their communication limited to formal letters and rare phone calls. Despite the hurt and pain, there was a fragile sense of forgiveness between them, born of mutual understanding and regret. Maggie retreated from public life entirely. She lived in near isolation, only occasionally visited by a health aide. The burden of her role in the tragedy drained her vitality, leaving her a shadow of her former self. As Seabrook slowly healed and life moved forward, the story of Sophia, David, and Maggie became a sobering reminder of how quickly and irreversibly lives can unravel. It compels us to examine our own relationships, to value the trust we share with loved ones, and to reflect on the lasting consequences of the choices we make. In the mountain town of Crestwood, the tale of two sisters, Elena and Isabel Morrison, unravels, a story woven with affection, rivalry, and unresolved tensions. Elena, the elder, was the embodiment of virtue, compassionate, accomplished, and married to Nathan Carter, a celebrated chef who owned a popular gourmet restaurant. Their union was admired throughout Crestwood, epitomizing an idyllic love story. Elena and Isabel were raised in a modest home. Their parents were local artisans known for their craftsmanship. From a young age, it was evident that the sisters were distinctly different. Elena was always composed and courteous, earning the pride of her parents. She excelled academically and was well-liked throughout Crestwood. It seemed destined that she would lead a significant life, settle down, and start a family. Isabel, in contrast, was vibrant and often unpredictable. Equally intelligent, she was recognized for her adventurous spirit and occasional defiance. As they matured, their paths diverged further. Elena pursued a career in education, while Isabel experimented with various occupations but never settled on one. When Isabel returned to Crestwood, her charismatic influence was more noticeable than ever. She had a knack for navigating out of tricky situations and often used her charm to achieve her desires. Her romantic endeavors were intense yet fleeting. She thrived on the initial thrill but quickly grew restless, leaving a trail of wounded hearts, which only enhanced her reputation as the unpredictable sister. After completing her studies, Elena returned to Crestwood and immediately caught the attention of Nathan Carter. He had come to Crestwood to launch his restaurant and was captivated by both the town's charm and Elena. Their romance blossomed swiftly, leading to a picturesque wedding celebrated by all. Nathan's venture flourished, and they settled into a charming home amidst the mountains. A seemingly perfect life, yet the facade of perfection occasionally cracked. Elena, always meeting others' expectations, began to yearn for more. She had shelved her dreams of travel and new experiences to support Nathan's culinary ambitions and their life in Crestwood. Nathan, while successful, sometimes felt the weight of his responsibilities and the constraints of their serene life. He adored Elena deeply, but occasionally felt stifled by the need to maintain an impeccable image. Into this complex dynamic, Isabel returned to Crestwood, claiming a desire to reconnect with her roots after years of city hopping. In truth, she was fleeing a broken relationship and mounting debts. Despite their differences, Elena welcomed Isabel with open arms, offering her sanctuary as she figured out her next steps. This gesture highlighted the enduring connection between the sisters, despite the divergent roads they had traveled. As Isabel settled into life at Nathan's gourmet restaurant in Crestwood, the dynamics among the three of them began to subtly yet significantly shift, setting the stage for a drama that would shake Crestwood to its core, forever altering their lives. Initially, Isabel's presence seemed to rejuvenate Nathan and Elena's relationship. Their evenings were filled with laughter and shared memories as the sisters reconnected, and Nathan played the role of the attentive husband and brother-in-law. However, as days turned into weeks, Isabel's true intentions began to surface. Her gaze lingered on Nathan a little too long. Her casual touches became more frequent and deliberate. She found reasons to be alone with him, asking for help with culinary techniques, seeking advice on photo shoots, or just catching him alone in the kitchen late at night after Elena had retired. Nathan, initially oblivious to Isabel's advances, found himself increasingly enchanted by her vibrant personality. Unlike Elena, who was steady and dependable, Isabel was spontaneous and exhilarating. She listened intently to his ideas for new dishes and restaurant expansions, asking insightful questions that made him feel truly appreciated. In those moments, Nathan felt a surge of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. Nathan was a man of integrity, dedicated to his wife and the life they had built. He tried to keep his distance from Isabel, finding reasons to immerse himself in his work or to take on extra culinary challenges that kept him away from home. But Isabel was persistent. She recognized the inner conflict in Nathan's eyes and saw it as an opportunity rather than a barrier. She began to weave a careful web of seduction, playing on his uncertainties and unfulfilled aspirations. One evening, while Elena was at a school board meeting, Isabel orchestrated what appeared to be an innocent dinner with Nathan. She prepared his favorite meal, opened a bottle of exquisite wine, and created an intimate setting that was hard to resist. As they talked deep into the night, Isabel skillfully steered the conversation towards Nathan's dreams and passions, areas where she knew Elena had not fully connected with him. Nathan felt a mix of flattery, desire, and overwhelming guilt. He stumbled over his words, trying to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but Isabel had already sensed her advantage. She leaned in closer, her hand brushing his. "Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to be truly understood? To be with someone who sees you for who you really are?" The tension in the room was palpable. Nathan knew he should leave, should end this precarious flirtation before it escalated, but he felt paralyzed, unable to detach from Isabel's allure. As Isabel kissed him passionately, Nathan's resistance crumbled. In that moment, the foundation of his marriage began to reveal cracks, setting off a chain of events that would lead to a profound tragedy. The weeks following that fateful night transformed into a whirlwind of clandestine encounters and escalating guilt for Nathan. What began as a momentary lapse evolved into a full-blown affair, with Nathan and Isabel devising clever ways to meet without Elena finding out. Their rendezvous ranged from brief encounters in the back rooms of the restaurant to well-orchestrated trips under the pretense of culinary research, far from the prying eyes of Crestwood. Isabel reveled in the thrill of their secret relationship, each meeting fueling her sense of triumph over her sister. For Nathan, the affair was a blend of excitement and self-reproach, leaving him exhilarated yet filled with remorse after each encounter. Isabel, adept in manipulation, knew precisely how to keep Nathan ensnared. She played the ideal companion, oscillating between being a passionate lover and a compassionate listener. She attended to his frustrations about his career and the aspirations he had yet to fulfill, providing the understanding and support he craved. "I've never met anyone like you, Nathan," she would whisper during their intimate moments. "You deserve so much more than this quiet life here." Her words were carefully crafted to instill seeds of discontent in Nathan's mind about his life with Elena. She conjured visions of a future brimming with excitement and freedom, free from the constraints of small-town expectations. Nathan found himself increasingly torn between his growing feelings for Isabel and his loyalty to Elena. The strain of leading a double life began to manifest in mood swings and unusual behavior that Elena could not ignore. At home, Nathan's guilt was evident through his alternating distance and excessive affection, as if trying to compensate for something. He immersed himself deeper into his culinary projects, taking on more initiatives than ever, using his restaurant as both a diversion and an alibi for his frequent absences. Isabel, for her part, maintained the facade of the attentive sister-in-law flawlessly. She would engage Elena in lengthy discussions, feigning interest in her day-to-day concerns while secretly reveling in her duplicity. Occasionally, a glimmer of guilt would cross Isabel's face, a brief recognition of the pain she was inflicting upon her sister. But these moments were fleeting and quickly suppressed by her desire for Nathan and her deep-seated ambition to outshine Elena. As their affair deepened, Nathan and Isabel began taking greater risks. They started meeting in more public spots around Crestwood, driven by their mutual attraction and becoming less cautious of the potential consequences. There were close calls. A restaurant patron nearly saw them together, and a local friend of Elena's spotted them at a cafe in a nearby village. Each brush with exposure only intensified their connection, making the risks seem like part of the excitement. But as the weeks turned into months, the stress of their secret started to take its toll. Nathan, who had once found the affair exhilarating, now felt perpetually tense. His guilt was overwhelming, affecting both his professional life and his personal relationships. He began to wonder if his feelings for Isabel were worth jeopardizing everything he had built with Elena. Isabel, sensing Nathan's inner conflict, intensified her efforts to keep him close. She demanded more of his time and became more vocal about her feeling. Her tactics grew more blatant, preying on his guilt and desires simultaneously. As the affair escalated to its peak, neither Nathan nor Isabel realized that their fragile web of lies was about to unravel. Meanwhile, Elena, unsuspecting at first, started noticing subtle changes. A strange new perfume on Nathan's clothes, secretive phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, and a growing emotional distance that was hard to ignore. Ironically, it was Isabel who became Elena's confidant during this period, offering comfort and reassurances that only deepened the betrayal. As time passed, Elena could no longer dismiss the doubts creeping into her mind. She became more vigilant about the inconsistencies in Nathan's explanations about late nights at the restaurant and supposed supplier meetings. She noticed Isabel's lingering looks at Nathan, the barely hidden desire in her eyes. One day, while sorting laundry, Elena found a matchbook from a bed and breakfast in a neighboring village. An inn she knew was not on any of Nathan's travel routes. The discovery sent a cold shock through her, confirming her worst fears. Torn between confronting the truth and fearing what it might reveal, Elena became consumed with anxiety. She withdrew from her social circles, unable to discuss her suspicions without making them feel more real. Her nights were restless, filled with unsettling dreams, and she found herself observing Nathan and Isabel closely, looking for any clue that might confirm her suspicions. In a moment of desperation, Elena thought about hiring a private investigator, but decided against inviting strangers into their private affairs. Instead, she resolved to confront Nathan and Isabel individually, hoping to pressure one of them into confessing. Little did she know, this decision would trigger a chain of events that would lead to a confrontation more catastrophic than she could have imagined, permanently altering their lives. The day of reckoning arrived on a stormy late autumn afternoon. Elena had spent the morning steeling herself for this confrontation, rehearsing her words, determined to remain composed despite the impending heartbreak. When Nathan walked in, shaking rain from his coat, he was met by the sight of his wife standing in the room, her expression a mask of barely contained emotions. The tension was palpable, and he immediately sensed that their carefully maintained facade was about to crumble. "We need to talk," Elena began, her voice quivering slightly despite her best efforts. "I know about you and Isabel." Nathan's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for words. In that quiet moment of shock, Elena saw the truth plainly written on his face, and her last shred of hope evaporated. "How long?" she demanded, her voice rising. "How long have you been seeing my sister?" Nathan's shoulders slumped in defeat, realizing there was no point in denying it any longer. "Elena, I'm so sorry. It just happened." Elena interrupted him with a bitter laugh. "You never meant to?"
What, did you just stumble into her bed? How could you do this? Her pent-up anger and hurt burst forth, filling the house with her loud accusations and questions. Nathan could only stand there, absorbing her fury, his weak apologies doing nothing to stem the tide of her wrath. As their argument reached its peak, the front door opened and Isabel stepped in, stopping short at the explosive scene. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen, caught in a tableau of betrayal and guilt. "Isabel, how timely of you to join us. We were just discussing your affair with my husband." Isabel's eyes darted between Elena and Nathan, her mind scrambling for an exit. Nathan, caught between the two sisters, tried to intervene. "Please, let's just calm down and talk about this rationally." His plea only redirected Elena's fury. In a burst of anger, Elena grabbed a vase from the coffee table and hurled it across the room, narrowly missing Nathan. It shattered against the wall, punctuating her word. The noise seemed to jolt Isabel from her defiant stand. For the first time, a flicker of remorse crossed her face. Nathan and Isabel exchanged a look of helpless guilt before slowly making their way to the door. As it closed behind them, Elena collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with sobs. The life she had cherished, the future she had envisioned, had crumbled in just a few moments. Outside, as the storm raged on, Elena's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, shame, betrayal, and a deep sense of loss. In that moment, she made a decision that would set in motion the final tragic act of their saga. The bartender, Hank, a seasoned observer of the Crestwood locals, watched with concern as Elena downed one drink after another. He had seen many patrons drown their sorrows at Crestwood Tavern, but the wild look in Elena's eyes tonight was especially troubling. "Another," Elena slurred, her gaze intense. Hank hesitated, but the determination in her eyes compelled him to comply. He poured another whiskey, neat, silently hoping it would be her last for the evening. As the night progressed, the tavern emptied, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and her drinks. The alcohol dulled the acute pain of betrayal, replacing it with a chilling resolve. Around midnight, Hank suggested it might be time for her to head home. "Need me to call you a cab, miss?" he asked. Elena waved him off, clumsily rummaging through her purse for her car keys. "I'm fine," she insisted. "I just need to get out of here." Hank tried to intervene, but Elena was already staggering toward the door. She managed to start her car in the deserted parking lot, its engine breaking the silence of the night. She drove off, her vision blurred and reactions sluggish, navigating the winding mountain roads that lay ahead. As she drove, Elena's mind was a whirl of emotions: anger at Nathan and Isabel's betrayal, shame for not having seen the signs sooner, fear of what lay ahead. Her speed increased as she took on the perilous curves of Mountain Pass. Then, disaster struck. Her dulled reflexes couldn't handle a sharp turn. The tires screeched, and the car began to slide. In a moment of terrifying clarity, Elena realized her mistake, but it was too late. The guardrail gave way with a horrific noise, and suddenly her car was airborne, plummeting toward the rocky terrain below. At dawn, Officer Liam Murphy received a distressing call. A hiker had discovered a wrecked car at the base of Mountain Pass, a notoriously dangerous stretch. With a heavy heart, Murphy approached the scene, dreading what he might find. The car was a mangled mess, barely recognizable after the violent crash. As the rescue team worked to retrieve the vehicle, Murphy began the grim task of the investigation. The license plate, miraculously intact, identified the vehicle as belonging to Elena Morrison. Murphy's heart sank. He knew Elena well, as did everyone in Crestwood. The burden of delivering such news to her family was immense. As the morning unfolded and the extent of the tragedy became evident, whispers spread throughout the town. Elena Morrison, known for her sensibility and dedication, had died in what appeared to be a tragic accident caused by drunk driving, a stark contrast to the woman everyone thought they knew. Detective Sarah Watson, brought in from the nearby city to lead the investigation, immediately sensed discrepancies in the case. Her keen eye noticed details that seemed off. The absence of skid marks on the mountain road suggested no attempt to brake, the odd angle of the car's descent off the cliff, and the reports of Elena drinking alone, which her friends adamantly claimed was out of character. Upon arriving at the Carter residence to deliver the grim news, Watson felt the tension thick in the air. Nathan Carter's reaction to his wife's death was subdued and seemed tinged with guilt, while Isabel Morrison's presence in the house at such an early hour raised immediate red flags. In the days that followed, Detective Watson dove deep into the investigation, peeling back the tranquil facade of Crestwood to reveal the underlying tensions. Her first stop was the Crestwood Tavern, where she spoke with the bartender, Hank. Hank recounted Elena's state on the last night of her life, describing how she had been heavily drinking. She was knocking him back like there was no tomorrow, he confessed, his expression marked by regret. I tried to stop her from driving. This account starkly contrasted with the description of Elena by her friends and colleagues, who knew her as cautious and responsible, not one to recklessly drink and drive. Watson's suspicions deepened. Watson next focused her attention on Nathan and Isabel. Their behavior post-Elena's death was peculiar. Rather than mourning separately, they appeared to find comfort in each other's company, exchanging meaningful glances and ceasing conversations abruptly when others approached. A significant breakthrough came when Watson interviewed Elena's close friend, Olivia Chun. Initially reluctant to speak ill of the deceased or add to the family's grief, Olivia eventually opened up under Watson's empathetic questioning. Elena had confided in me just days before it happened, Olivia disclosed, her voice trembling. She suspected Nathan was having an affair with Isabel. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light, prompting Detective Watson to delve deeper into the relationships and secrets that might have led to the tragic events of that fateful night. This confession illuminated the entire case for Detective Watson. She wasted no time in verifying the details, delving into Nathan and Isabel's recent actions. Bank statements revealed suspicious transactions, hotel bookings, and costly gifts that coincided with Nathan's supposed supplier meetings. As evidence mounted, Watson summoned Nathan and Isabel for separate interrogation. Under her rigorous questioning, their concocted stories began to unravel. Isabel was the first to break. Yes, we were having an affair, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. Elena found out that night. We had a massive argument, the three of us, but I swear we didn't realize she had left the house afterward. Confronted with Isabel's admission, Nathan also confessed to the affair but vehemently denied any role in Elena's tragic death. We made a terrible mistake, he said, his voice heavy with regret. But I loved Elena. I would never have wanted this to happen. Watson believed their claims that they hadn't directly caused Elena's death, but she understood that their actions had set the catastrophic sequence of events in motion. Her report painted a clear picture. Elena, devastated by the betrayal, turned to alcohol for solace. Her decision to drive that night, though ultimately her own, was profoundly influenced by the emotional turmoil caused by Nathan and Isabel's deceit. Ultimately, no criminal charges were filed in relation to Elena's death, but in the court of public opinion, Nathan and Isabel were judged severely. The scandal of their affair spread throughout Crestwood, irreparably tarnishing their reputations and ensuring that the memory of Elena's demise would haunt them forever. As time passed, the acute pain of the incident began to fade, but its impact lingered in Crestwood. The town gradually returned to its serene exterior, but its inhabitants carried with them the knowledge that beneath the surface of their seemingly peaceful community, powerful emotions and hidden secrets could swirl with devastating consequences. The tragedy of Elena Morrison had indelibly altered the soul of Crestwood, marking its history and its people permanently. Nestled in the heart of this idyllic community stood the home of Andrew and Jessica Howard. To their neighbors, the Howards appeared to be the perfect couple, successful, attractive, and deeply in love. Andrew, a financial analyst with a prestigious firm, was known for his sharp mind and quiet demeanor. His tall frame and piercing blue eyes gave him an air of authority that commanded respect from colleagues and neighbors alike. Jessica, a rising star in the local art scene, was the very picture of grace and creativity. Her vibrant paintings adorned the walls of galleries throughout the city, drawing admirers from far and wide. For years, the Howards' life seemed like a fairy tale. They hosted elegant dinner parties, attended community events, and were often seen strolling hand in hand through the neighborhood park. Their home, a stately Victorian with a wraparound porch, was the envy of the community, its perfectly tended rose garden a testament to their seemingly perfect union. As summer faded into autumn, the idyllic facade began to crack. The truth that lay behind the Howards' picture-perfect life would soon shock the quiet community to its very core. Andrew and Jessica Howard's story began long before they met, shaped by experiences that would ultimately set the stage for the horror to come. Andrew Howard's childhood was far from the suburban dream he later cultivated. Born to a single mother in a run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city, young Andrew learned early on that love was a commodity easily lost. His mother, struggling with addiction, cycled through a series of abusive relationships, leaving Andrew to fend for himself more often than not. From an early age, Andrew exhibited signs of obsessive behavior. He would fixate on objects or ideas, unable to let go until he had examined them from every angle. This trait served him well academically, propelling him to the top of his class despite his challenging home life. However, it also manifested in more troubling ways. Andrew became possessive of the few friends he made, reacting with intense jealousy when they spent time with others. As he grew older, Andrew channeled his obsessive nature into his studies, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university. There he reinvented himself, shedding the trappings of his impoverished past and embracing the persona of a sophisticated, ambitious young man. Yet beneath the polished exterior, the scars of his childhood lingered. Jessica Hartley's upbringing stood in stark contrast to Andrew's. Raised in a loving, artistic family, she was encouraged from a young age to explore her creativity. Her parents, both educators, nurtured her talent and supported her dreams. Jessica's childhood home was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of oil paints. As a teenager, Jessica's artistic abilities blossomed. Her unique style, blending vibrant colors with surrealist elements, caught the attention of local gallery owners. By the time she entered college to study fine arts, Jessica was already making a name for herself in the art world. It was at a charity auction that Andrew and Jessica's paths first crossed. Andrew, now a rising star at his financial firm, was immediately captivated by the vivacious artist. Jessica, in turn, was drawn to Andrew's intensity and charm. Their courtship was a whirlwind of passion and romance, with Andrew showering Jessica with lavish gifts and unwavering attention. Within 6 months, Andrew proposed, presenting Jessica with a stunning diamond ring. Swept up in the fairy tale romance, she said yes. Their wedding, held in a picturesque vineyard, was the social event of the season. As they exchanged vows, neither could have imagined the dark turn their love story would take. To the outside world, Andrew and Jessica Howard were a match made in heaven. But as they settled into married life, the cracks in their foundation began to show, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to unimaginable horror. The early years of the Howards' marriage were marked by genuine happiness and mutual adoration. Andrew reveled in his role as Jessica's husband, proudly accompanying her to gallery openings and basking in the reflected glow of her success. Jessica, for her part, found Andrew's devotion intoxicating, feeling truly seen and appreciated for the first time in her life. Their home on Sycamore Lane became a hub of social activity, with the couple hosting lavish dinner parties for their growing circle of friends. Andrew would regale guests with tales of his financial conquests, while Jessica's warmth and charm kept conversation flowing. To all who knew them, the Howards seemed to have it all: success, love, and a bright future ahead. But as months turned into years, subtle shifts began to occur in the dynamics of their relationship. Andrew's natural tendency toward obsession, once focused on his career, now centered entirely on Jessica. He began to monitor her movements, questioning her about her daily activities, and growing increasingly agitated when she spent time away from him. At first, Jessica found Andrew's possessiveness flattering, interpreting it as a sign of his deep love for her. She would laugh off his probing questions, assuring him that he had nothing to worry about. But as his behavior intensified, she started to feel suffocated by his constant need for her attention and presence. Andrew's obsession manifested in increasingly controlling ways. He insisted on driving Jessica to and from her studio, claiming concern for her safety. He began to criticize her choice of clothing, suggesting more modest options that wouldn't attract attention from other men. When Jessica spoke of expanding her artistic reach to galleries in other cities, Andrew reacted with thinly veiled disapproval, citing the importance of focusing on their life together. As Jessica's career continued to flourish, Andrew's insecurity grew. He attended her gallery openings not as a supportive husband, but as a watchful guardian, his eyes constantly scanning the room for potential threats to his relationship. When admirers approached Jessica to discuss her work, Andrew would insert himself into the conversation, his arm wrapped possessively around his wife's waist. At home, Andrew began to subtly undermine Jessica's confidence. He would make offhand comments about the subjective nature of art, questioning whether her success was truly based on talent or merely on fleeting trends. These remarks, delivered with a smile and a kiss, slowly chipped away at Jessica's self-assurance. Jessica, caught up in the whirlwind of her rising fame, initially failed to recognize the full extent of Andrew's changing behavior. She attributed his mood swings and increased clinginess to stress from his job, convincing herself that it was just a phase they would work through together. But as Andrew's obsession deepened, so did the chasm between them. Jessica found herself censoring her conversations, carefully considering her words to avoid triggering Andrew's jealousy or disapproval. She began to withdraw from friends, canceling plans at the last minute to appease her husband's desire for her constant presence. In quiet moments when Andrew was at work and she was alone in her studio, Jessica would stare at her half-finished canvases, feeling the spark of creativity that had once burned so brightly beginning to flicker. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in her marriage, but the thought of confronting Andrew filled her with a nameless dread. Little did Jessica know that behind Andrew's increasingly erratic behavior lurked a darkness far more sinister than she could have imagined. As his obsession grew, so too did the twisted fantasies that would ultimately lead their love story to its horrifying conclusion. As Andrew's obsession with Jessica intensified, a disturbing new element began to creep into his psyche. Late at night, while Jessica slept peacefully beside him, Andrew would sit bathed in the blue glow of his computer screen, delving into the darkest corners of the internet. What began as idle curiosity soon morphed into a full-blown fixation on the macabre and taboo. Andrew found himself drawn to historical accounts of cannibalism, poring over tales of the Donner Party and ritualistic practices of ancient cultures. He devoured true crime stories about killers who had consumed their victims, his mind racing with a mixture of revulsion and fascination. As the weeks passed, his online searches became more specific, more disturbing. How to prepare human flesh, effects of consuming human meat, legal consequences of cannibalism. In the recesses of his troubled mind, a horrifying fantasy began to take shape. Andrew imagined consuming Jessica, not just metaphorically as he had with his possessive behavior, but literally. The idea of making her a permanent part of himself, of truly possessing her in every way possible, became an all-consuming obsession. During the day, Andrew struggled to maintain his facade of normalcy. He went through the motions at work, his mind constantly drifting to his dark desires. In meetings, he would find himself staring at his colleagues' throats, wondering about the taste and texture of human flesh. These thoughts both thrilled and disgusted him, adding to the turmoil in his fractured psyche. At home, Andrew's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would watch Jessica intently as she moved about the house, his gaze lingering on the curve of her neck, the softness of her skin. During dinner, he would ask strange questions about her diet and exercise routine, framing them as concern for her health, while secretly assessing her quality as potential sustenance. Jessica, unaware of the true nature of Andrew's thoughts, attributed his odd behavior to stress and tried her best to soothe him. She suggested they take a vacation, hoping that time away from work might help Andrew relax. But the idea of being alone with Jessica, away from prying eyes, only fueled Andrew's dark fantasies. As his obsession grew, Andrew began to see signs and omens everywhere, convincing himself that fate was pushing him toward his gruesome goal. A rare steak served at a restaurant became a divine message. A paper cut on Jessica's finger, leaving a drop of blood on her painting, seemed like an invitation. Andrew knew his thoughts were wrong, that they crossed a line no sane person would contemplate. In moments of clarity, he would be overwhelmed with shame and self-loathing. He considered seeking help, even going so far as to research therapists in the area. But the fear of exposure, of losing Jessica and the life he had built, always held him back. Instead, Andrew retreated further into his private world of twisted desires. He began keeping a journal, hidden in a locked drawer in his home office, where he detailed his fantasies in graphic, disturbing prose. As the pages filled, Andrew felt himself slipping further from reality, edging closer to a point of no return. As summer gave way to autumn, the facade of normalcy began to crumble. Jessica, no longer able to ignore the changes in her husband, found herself walking on eggshells in her own home. Andrew's mood swings had become more pronounced, his behavior increasingly unpredictable. One crisp Saturday morning, Jessica was preparing for an important meeting with a prestigious gallery owner from New York. As she applied her makeup, Andrew appeared in the bathroom doorway, his eyes dark with barely contained anger. He demanded to know why she was getting so dressed up, accusing her of trying to attract attention from other men. When Jessica tried to explain the importance of the meeting, Andrew flew into a rage, knocking her carefully arranged portfolio to the floor and scattering sketches across the tile. Shocked and frightened by this outburst, Jessica seriously considered canceling the meeting, but a small voice inside her, one that had been growing louder in recent months, urged her not to give in to Andrew's controlling behavior. With trembling hands, she gathered her sketches and left for the meeting, ignoring Andrew's alternating pleas for forgiveness and muttered threats. The incident marked a turning point in their relationship. Jessica began to notice things she had previously overlooked or dismissed. The way Andrew's gaze would linger on her throat during conversations, a strange glint in his eye that sent shivers down her spine. His insistence on preparing all their meals himself, claiming it was an expression of his love, while questioning every morsel she put in her mouth. Jessica confided in her closest friend, Beatrice, sharing her growing fears about Andrew's behavior. Beatrice urged her to leave, offering her spare room as a safe haven. But Jessica, still clinging to the memory of the man she had fallen in love with, hesitated. She convinced herself that if she could just understand what was troubling Andrew, she could help him return to his old self. Meanwhile, Andrew's professional life was unraveling as rapidly as his personal one. His obsession with Jessica and his dark fantasies left little room for focus on his work. He began making careless errors, missing important deadlines and snapping at colleagues. His once promising career was now hanging by a thread, with whispered conversations and concerned looks following him through the office. During a crucial presentation to the company's biggest client, Andrew's mind wandered to thoughts of Jessica. He found himself describing market trends in terms of consumption and digestion, his words becoming increasingly bizarre and inappropriate. The client shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging worried glances as Andrew's supervisor attempted to salvage the meeting. The following day, Andrew was called into his supervisor's office. He was presented with a choice: take a leave of absence to address his obvious personal issues or face termination. In a moment of clarity, Andrew agreed to the leave, recognizing it as an opportunity to spend more time with Jessica and to finally act on his deepening obsession. As news of Andrew's professional troubles spread through their social circle, the invitations to dinner parties and community events began to dry up. The Howards, once the golden couple, now found themselves increasingly isolated. Jessica, torn between her love for Andrew and her growing fear of him, threw herself into her art. Her paintings, once celebrated for their vibrant colors and joyful themes, took on a darker tone. Critics praised her new work for its raw emotion and haunting imagery, unaware of the turmoil that inspired it. In the quiet of their home, as autumn leaves fell outside their windows, Andrew and Jessica orbited each other like binary stars locked in a decaying dance. The tension between them was palpable, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Neither could have predicted the horrifying form that explosion would take, nor how close they were to the point of no return. With his leave of absence from work, Andrew found himself with an abundance of free time he dedicated to nurturing his darkest fantasies. The idea of consuming Jessica, once a fleeting thought, had now become an all-encompassing obsession. In the recesses of his troubled mind, a plan began to take shape. Andrew's first step was to gather the necessary tools. He made a series of purchases, each seemingly innocent on its own, but chilling when viewed as part of a larger scheme. A new set of sharp kitchen knives, ordered online to avoid suspicion. Heavy-duty plastic sheeting, ostensibly for a home improvement project. A large freezer, delivered under the guise of stocking up on food for the winter. As he accumulated his grim collection, Andrew immersed himself in research. He spent hours poring over anatomy textbooks, studying the human body with a detached, clinical interest that belied his true intentions. He researched methods of sedation, weighing the pros and cons of various drugs and techniques. In a notebook hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his study, Andrew meticulously recorded his findings, sketching out plans and contingencies. The technical aspects of his plan occupied much of Andrew's thoughts, but he also grappled with the psychological implications of what he was considering. He tried to rationalize his desires, convincing himself that his act would be one of ultimate love and devotion. In his warped mind, consuming Jessica would ensure that they would be together forever, her essence becoming a permanent part of him. As his plan solidified, Andrew found himself caught in a constant internal struggle. Moments of clarity would break through the fog of his obsession, leaving him horrified at what he was contemplating. In these moments, he would consider confessing everything to Jessica, begging for her help and forgiveness. But the pull of his dark desires was always stronger, dragging him back into the abyss of his twisted fantasy. Andrew began to test the waters, pushing the boundaries of his relationship with Jessica to see how far he could go. He tested trying new exotic foods, watching her reaction closely as he described dishes that skirted the edge of taboo. He initiated conversations about mortality and the nature of existence, probing Jessica's beliefs about the afterlife and the connection between body and soul. Jessica, already on edge from Andrew's erratic behavior, found these conversations deeply unsettling. She noticed a new intensity in his gaze when he looked at her, a hunger that seemed to go beyond mere desire. Though she couldn't put her finger on what exactly was wrong, her instincts screamed that she was in danger. As his plan neared completion, Andrew felt a mix of anticipation and dread. He knew that once he took action, there would be no going back. The life he had built, the facade of normalcy he had maintained for so long, would be shattered forever. But the compulsion to follow through with his dark fantasy had become too strong to resist. In the final days leading up to his planned act, Andrew's behavior became increasingly erratic. He alternated between periods of manic energy, during which he would lavish attention on Jessica, and dark moods where he would retreat into himself, barely acknowledging her presence. The tension in their home reached a fever pitch, with both Andrew and Jessica aware that something monumental was about to occur, though only one of them knew the true nature of what was to come. The morning dawned gray and overcast, matching the somber mood that had settled over the community. Jessica awoke to find Andrew's side of the bed empty, the sheets cold. She found him in the kitchen, meticulously sharpening a set of knives. The sight sent a chill down her spine, though she couldn't articulate why. "Andrew, you startled me," Jessica said, her voice trembling slightly. Andrew looked up, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "Everything's perfect, my love," he replied, his voice unnaturally calm. "I'm just preparing for a special dinner tonight. I want everything to be just right." Jessica forced a smile, trying to ignore the knot of fear tightening in her stomach. "That sounds lovely," she said. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Andrew shook his head, returning his attention to the knife in his hand. "No need," he murmured. "I want this to be a surprise. You just relax and enjoy your day." Unable to shake her sense of unease, Jessica retreated to her studio. She tried to lose herself in her painting, but found her hand shaking too much to hold a brush steady. Instead, she sat at her desk, penning a letter to her parents that she had no intention of sending. In it, she poured out her fears about Andrew's behavior, her growing sense that something was terribly wrong in their marriage. Writing the words felt cathartic, even if she knew they would never be read. Meanwhile, Andrew went about his preparations with a methodical precision that belied the madness of his intentions. He lined the basement with plastic sheeting, arranged his tools with care, and prepared the sedatives he planned to use. Each action was accompanied by a running commentary in his head, a twisted logic that justified his plans as acts of love and devotion. As the day wore on, neighbors noticed unusual activity at the Howard house. Beatrice, Jessica's friend who lived across the street, observed Andrew making multiple trips to his car, loading and unloading various items. She considered calling Jessica to check in, but hesitated, not wanting to seem nosy. Another neighbor, elderly Mr. Grayson, was out walking his dog when he heard raised voices coming from inside the Howard home. He paused, straining to make out the words but could only discern the tone. Jessica's voice, high and frightened, followed by Andrew's lower, more menacing rumble. Inside, the confrontation that Mr. Grayson had overheard was reaching a boiling point. Jessica, unable to bear the tension any longer, had confronted Andrew about his behavior. Jessica confronted Andrew, her face streaked with tears as she expressed her confusion and fear over the changes in his behavior and their relationship. She pleaded with him to open up and explain what was happening. Andrew, feeling his carefully laid plan slipping away, struggled to maintain his composure. He responded cryptically, claiming she wouldn't understand and insisting that his actions were for the sake of their love. Sensing the dangerous undercurrent in Andrew's words, Jessica began to retreat. She suggested taking some time apart, proposing to stay with her parents until they could work through their issues. As Jessica turned to leave, Andrew's demeanor suddenly changed. He grabbed her arm forcefully, preventing her departure. His voice took on a menacing tone as he declared that he wouldn't allow her to leave, insisting that they were destined to be together forever. In that moment, looking into her husband's eyes, Jessica saw the full extent of his madness. She realized with a clarity that cut through her fear that she was in mortal danger. As Andrew's grip tightened, Jessica knew that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of her marriage, but her very survival. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Howards' living room, the situation had reached a critical point. Jessica, her arm bruised from Andrew's grip, stood frozen in place, her mind racing to find a way out of this nightmare. "Andrew, please," she pleaded, struggling to keep her voice calm. "Let's talk about this. Whatever's going on, we can get through it together. We can get help." Andrew's eyes, once filled with love and warmth, now burned with a manic intensity that chilled Jessica to her core. "Don't you see?" he said, his voice eerily calm. "This is the only way we can truly be together. Forever." As he spoke, Andrew began to guide Jessica towards the basement door, his grip on her arm never loosening. Jessica's heart raced, knowing instinctively that if she allowed herself to be taken down those stairs, she might never come back up. In a desperate bid for freedom, Jessica stomped hard on Andrew's foot and twisted out of his grasp. She ran for the front door, her fingers fumbling with the lock as Andrew recovered and lunged towards her. Just as she managed to wrench the door open, Andrew slammed it shut, the bang echoing through the quiet suburban street. Outside, Mr. Grayson, who was returning from his evening walk, heard the commotion and paused. He could hear muffled shouting coming from inside the Howard home, the voices rising in intensity. Concerned, he approached the house, his hand hovering over his phone, ready to call for help. Inside, Jessica found herself cornered in the kitchen. She grabbed a knife from the counter, holding it out in front of her with shaking hands. "Stay back, Andrew," she warned, her voice quavering. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." Andrew paused, his eyes fixed on the knife in Jessica's hand. "My love," he said, his tone sickeningly sweet. "You don't understand. This is for us. I'm going to make us one. You'll be a part of me forever." As he spoke, Andrew inched closer, his hand reaching for something in his pocket. Jessica, realizing with horror what he intended, knew she had to act. With a cry of fear and desperation, she lunged forward, the knife slashing across Andrew's outstretched arm. Andrew reeled back, more surprised than hurt, staring at the thin line of blood welling up on his skin. For a moment, the shock seemed to clear his mind. "Jessica," he said, his voice suddenly small and confused. "What's happening?" Jessica, seeing a glimmer of her husband in those confused eyes, felt a surge of hope. "Andrew," she said gently, lowering the knife slightly. "It's okay. We can get through this. Let me help you." But the moment of clarity was fleeting. Andrew's eyes hardened once more, the madness returning in full force. "No," he growled. "It's too late. We've come too far." With surprising speed, Andrew lunged forward, knocking the knife from Jessica's hand. She cried out in pain and fear as he grabbed her, his strength overwhelming her attempts to break free. Andrew began to drag her towards the basement door, Jessica's heels leaving scuff marks on the polished hardwood floor as she fought against him. Outside, Mr. Grayson had heard enough. The sounds of struggle and Jessica's cries for help spurred him into action. He dialed 911, his voice urgent as he reported a domestic disturbance to the dispatcher. Inside the house, Jessica managed to break free once more, running for the stairs in a desperate bid to reach a phone. Andrew pursued her, his face contorted with rage and frustration. As they struggled on the landing, a vase was knocked over, shattering on the floor below. The noise caught the attention of Beatrice, who had been watching the Howard house with growing concern all evening. She saw shadows moving frantically behind the curtains and heard what sounded like a scream. Without hesitation, she too called 911, her voice joining Mr. Grayson's in urging the police to hurry. The sirens began to wail in the distance. Andrew realized his carefully laid plans were crumbling around him. In a last, desperate attempt to fulfill his twisted fantasy, he redoubled his efforts to subdue Jessica. The two grappled at the top of the stairs, teetering dangerously close to the edge. Just as Andrew seemed to gain the upper hand, the sound of screeching tires and car doors slamming echoed from outside. The police had arrived, drawn by the frantic calls of concerned neighbors. As flashlight beams cut through the gathering darkness outside, Andrew and Jessica remained locked in their final desperate struggle, the fate of their tragic love story hanging in the balance. The quiet was shattered by the piercing wail of police sirens as squad cars converged. Officers leapt from their vehicles, hands on their holstered weapons, responding to the urgent calls of a domestic disturbance. Inside the house, Andrew and Jessica froze at the sound of car doors slamming and urgent voices outside. Jessica, seeing her chance for salvation, broke free from Andrew's grip and raced down the stairs screaming for help. Andrew, his mind reeling from the sudden interruption of his plans, hesitated for a crucial moment before giving chase. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, the front door burst open, revealing 2 police officers with weapons drawn. "Drop to the ground now," one officer shouted, his voice authoritative and firm. Andrew, cornered and desperate, made a final lunge for Jessica. In that instant, several things happened at once. Jessica ducked out of the way, her momentum carrying her towards the safety of the officers. Andrew, overbalancing, stumbled and fell, and the officers, perceiving a threat, moved swiftly to subdue him. In a flurry of motion, Andrew was tackled to the ground, his arms wrenched behind his back as handcuffs were snapped into place. He thrashed and yelled incoherently, all pretense of sanity gone as he watched his twisted fantasy slip away. Jessica, shaking and sobbing, was gently led outside by a female officer. She collapsed into the arms of Beatrice, who had rushed over as soon as the police arrived. Neighbors gathered on the street, watching in shocked silence as the scene unfolded. Andrew, deemed mentally unfit to stand trial, was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility. Doctors struggled to understand the depths of his delusion, the way his love had twisted into something dark and monstrous. His case would become a cautionary tale of obsession, taken to its extreme. The Howard house stood empty, a silent reminder of the tragedy that had almost occurred within its walls. At the center of this storm were 3 individuals whose lives would become inextricably entangled. Thaddeus Bracey, a 32-year-old personal trainer with a body chiseled from marble, had built a reputation as the go-to fitness guru. Among his newest clients was Julia Ashworth, a 45-year-old socialite known for her impeccable taste. Julia was the very picture of suburban success, intelligent, beautiful, and married to Luke Ashworth, a 50-year-old real estate mogul whose name graced half the commercial buildings in the nearby city. The Ashworths were the golden couple of Oak Ridge Heights. Their sprawling Georgian-style mansion hosted the most coveted parties, and their philanthropic efforts made headlines in the local press. To the outside world, they embodied the American dream, successful, charitable, and deeply in love. But as with many stories that begin in seeming perfection, cracks were forming in the foundation of the Ashworths' world. These fissures would provide the perfect entry point for Thaddeus Bracey, a man whose own past was shrouded in mystery and marked by a determination to rise above his humble beginnings. Little did anyone know that the arrival of Thaddeus in the Ashworths' lives would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to passion, betrayal, and ultimately, a confrontation that would leave the community reeling and one person dead. Thaddeus Bracey's journey to becoming Oak Ridge Heights' most sought-after personal trainer was far from smooth. Born in a struggling neighborhood of Detroit, Thaddeus grew up in a world where survival often trumped ambition. His father, a factory worker, died when Thaddeus was just 10, leaving his mother to raise him and his 2 younger sisters on a meager salary. From an early age, Thaddeus found solace and strength in physical fitness. The local community center became his second home, where he spent countless hours lifting weights and running on old treadmills. It was here that he first dreamed of a life beyond the confines of his neighborhood. At 18, Thaddeus enlisted in the Army, seeing it as his ticket out. During his 4-year service, he honed his body and mind, earning accolades for his physical prowess and leadership skills. However, his military career came to an abrupt end when he was honorably discharged following a controversial incident involving a superior officer, the details of which Thaddeus never fully disclosed. Upon returning to civilian life, Thaddeus leveraged his military experience and physical conditioning into a career as a personal trainer. He started small, working at budget gyms and taking on any client he could find. His dedication, combined with his natural charisma, soon earned him a devoted following. 5 years before the events that would change everything, Thaddeus made the calculated decision to move to Oak Ridge Heights. He saw the affluent suburb as fertile ground for his ambitions, a place where his skills could command premium prices. Within 2 years, he had established himself as the trainer to the stars, his past struggles hidden behind a veneer of success and confidence. Luke and Julia Ashworth's marriage was the stuff of local legend. They had met 20 years earlier at a charity auction, where Luke, already a rising star in real estate, had outbid everyone for a date with Julia, then a recent college graduate working in public relations. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding just 6 months later, covered extensively by the local media. For the first decade of their marriage, Luke and Julia seemed to have it all. Luke's business acumen led to the rapid expansion of his real estate empire, while Julia's social skills and philanthropic efforts made them the darlings of Oak Ridge Heights high society. They traveled the world, donated generously to local causes, and hosted events that were the talk of the town. However, as the years wore on, subtle tensions began to emerge. Luke's workaholic tendencies meant he was often absent, leaving Julia to manage their social life and household alone. Their inability to conceive a child, despite years of trying and expensive fertility treatments, added strain to their relationship. To the outside world, the Ashworths maintained a united front. They still attended events arm in arm, smiling for cameras and exchanging loving glances. But behind closed doors, silence and resentment were becoming more common than intimate conversations. Julia threw herself into her charity work and social engagements, while Luke spent increasingly long hours at the office. By the time Thaddeus entered their lives, the Ashworths' marriage was a beautifully crafted facade, hiding a growing emotional distance that neither was fully ready to acknowledge. The fateful first encounter between Thaddeus and Luke occurred at the Oak Ridge Heights Country Club, where Julia had begun taking personal training sessions with Thaddeus. Luke, finishing a round of golf, happened upon them as Thaddeus was demonstrating a stretch to Julia. Luke's eyes were immediately drawn to Thaddeus's physique, a fact he would later struggle to admit to himself. Thaddeus, ever the professional, greeted Luke with his trademark winning smile and a firm handshake that lingered a moment too long. As Julia enthusiastically praised Thaddeus's skills as a trainer, Luke found himself captivated by the younger man's confidence and easy charm. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on fitness, business, and their shared love of vintage cars. Before parting ways, Luke surprised himself by expressing interest in personal training sessions. Thaddeus, sensing an opportunity, suggested a trial session at the Ashworth home gym. As Luke watched Thaddeus walk away, he felt a flutter of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. For his part, Thaddeus knew he had made an impression on the powerful Mr. Ashworth, an impression he was determined to capitalize on, both professionally and personally. The first private training session between Thaddeus and Luke took place on a crisp, autumn morning in the Ashworth state-of-the-art home gym. Julia had left early for a charity board meeting, leaving the two men alone in the sprawling mansion. As Thaddeus guided Luke through a series of exercises, the sexual tension between them was palpable. Luke found himself hyper-aware of Thaddeus's touch as the trainer adjusted his form. Their eyes met in the mirror, lingering longer than necessary. Thaddeus, sensing Luke's interest, subtly increased the intimacy of his instructions, his hands ghosting over Luke's body under the guise of professional guidance. By the end of the session, both men were breathless, and not just from the physical exertion. As Luke toweled off, Thaddeus made his move. He complimented Luke's physique, noting how responsive his body was to instruction. The innuendo was clear, and Luke, his defenses lowered by endorphins and long-suppressed desire, didn't resist when Thaddeus leaned in for a kiss. What followed was a passionate encounter that left both men exhilarated and conflicted. For Luke, it was a revelation, a chance to explore feelings he had long buried beneath his heterosexual marriage and public persona. For Thaddeus, it was a mixture of genuine attraction and calculated risk, knowing that an affair with Luke could either elevate or destroy his carefully constructed life in Oak Ridge Heights. In the aftermath, as they lay catching their breath on the gym floor, reality began to seep back in. Luke, guilt washing over him, started to stammer out apologies and excuses. Thaddeus, ever the smooth operator, reassured him. This could be their secret, he suggested. No one needed to know. They were both adults, both seeking something their current lives couldn't provide. Why not indulge? Luke, torn between his loyalty to Julia and his newfound passion, ultimately agreed to continue the affair. They set ground rules. Discretion was paramount, and their encounters would be limited to training sessions when Julia was away. Over the next few months, Thaddeus and Luke's affair intensified. What started as purely physical quickly developed emotional undertones. Luke found himself opening up to Thaddeus about his frustrations with work and his marriage in a way he never had with anyone else. Thaddeus, in turn, shared carefully curated stories from his past, painting himself as a sensitive soul beneath his confident exterior. Their rendezvous became more frequent and daring. Quick encounters in the home gym expanded to steamy sessions in high-end hotel rooms and secluded spots around Oak Ridge Heights. Each time, they promised it would be the last, but neither could resist the pull of their forbidden romance. As their emotional connection deepened, so did the risks they were willing to take. Close calls became more frequent, a lingering touch at a charity event, a heated glance across a crowded restaurant. The thrill of nearly being caught only added to the intensity of their affair. Little did they know their web of secrecy was about to unravel, setting in motion a series of events that would shake the foundations of Oak Ridge Heights and lead to consequences neither man could have foreseen. As Thaddeus and Luke's affair intensified, so did the complexity of their deceptions. Luke, once a man of routine, began crafting elaborate excuses for his absences and changes in schedule. Late nights at the office became more frequent, with Luke claiming he was working on a major development deal that required his constant attention. Weekend golf games stretched into all-day affairs, supposedly due to networking opportunities with potential clients. Thaddeus, for his part, juggled his growing client list with precision, always ensuring he had a plausible reason to be near Luke. He cultivated friendships with other Oak Ridge Heights residents, using their sessions as cover for his frequent presence in the neighborhood. He even went so far as to start a fitness class at the country club, providing a legitimate reason for his car to be parked there at odd hours. Their lies began to intertwine, creating a fragile house of cards. They coordinated their stories, memorizing details of fabricated events and imaginary people to maintain consistency. Luke spoke of a new junior partner named Xavier, who conveniently required extensive mentoring during evening hours. Thaddeus invented a high-maintenance client called Eloise, whose demands for last-minute sessions explained his sudden schedule changes. The stress of maintaining these falsehoods took its toll. Luke, once known for his sharp memory, found himself struggling to keep track of his own lies. He began keeping a coded journal, hidden in his office safe, to maintain the consistency of his stories. Thaddeus, ever meticulous, created a complex calendar system on his phone, with layers of fake appointments hiding the truth of his whereabouts. As months passed, their web of deceit grew ever more tangled. Each lie required another to support it, and soon both men found themselves living in a parallel reality of their own creation. The thrill of their secret rendezvous was increasingly tainted by the constant fear of discovery, yet neither could bring themselves to end the affair. While Thaddeus and Luke were entangled in their affair, Julia Ashworth was far from oblivious. At first, the changes in her husband were subtle. A new cologne, a sudden interest in fitness, longer hours at the office. She initially attributed these changes to a midlife renaissance, even feeling a spark of hope that it might rejuvenate their stagnant marriage. However, as weeks turned to months, Julia's instincts began to sound alarms. Luke's emotional distance, once a dull ache in their relationship, now felt like a chasm. His excuses for missed dinners and social engagements grew more elaborate and less convincing. She noticed him guarding his phone, angling the screen away when she entered a room. Julia's suspicions began to affect her daily life. She found herself analyzing every conversation, searching for inconsistencies in Luke's stories. Her normally impeccable focus during charity meetings wavered as her mind raced with possibilities. Was Luke having an affair? Was it with a colleague or perhaps a younger woman? The irony that Thaddeus, her own personal trainer, was at the center of her marital turmoil eluded her completely. In fact, Julia often confided in Thaddeus during their sessions, unaware that she was sharing her fears with the very man causing them. Thaddeus, in a display of psychological acrobatics, offered her comfort and advice, all while continuing his affair with her husband. As her suspicions grew, Julia began to withdraw from her social circles, fearful that she was the subject of local gossip. Her charity work, once a source of joy and purpose, became a performance where she struggled to maintain her composure. At home, the silence between her and Luke grew heavier, filled with unasked questions and unspoken accusations. Determined to uncover the truth, Julia decided to take matters into her own hands, setting in motion a series of events that would ultimately lead to a confrontation with devastating consequences. The fragile equilibrium of Thaddeus and Luke's secret affair was shattered. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, when Thaddeus received an anonymous text message. The contents were chilling: a clear photograph of him and Luke in an intimate embrace, taken through the window of their favorite hotel room. The message that followed was succinct: "50K or this goes public. You have 48 hours. Panic set in immediately. Thaddeus's carefully constructed world in Oak Ridge Heights teetered on the brink of collapse. His reputation, his business, everything he had worked for was at risk. But more than that, the threat extended to Luke. Exposure would mean the end of his marriage, potential professional ruin, and public humiliation. Thaddeus immediately contacted Luke, arranging an urgent meeting under the guise of an emergency training session. In the secluded corner of a 24-hour gym, Thaddeus showed Luke the threatening message. Luke's face drained of color as he realized the precariousness of their situation. The next 48 hours were a frenzy of activity, as they scrambled to gather the funds without raising suspicion. Luke, despite his wealth, found himself in a liquidity crunch due to ongoing real estate developments. He was forced to take out a high-interest loan, claiming it was for a time-sensitive business opportunity. Thaddeus liquidated his savings and maxed out his credit cards, telling his bank he was planning to open a new gym. As the deadline approached, the strain began to show. Luke became irritable and distracted, snapping at colleagues and avoiding Julia even more than usual. Thaddeus's typically flawless training sessions were marred by distraction and anxiety, leading to complaints from some of his high-profile clients. With just hours to spare, they managed to cobble together the required amount. Following the blackmailer's instructions, Thaddeus made the drop at a designated location, a nondescript locker at the Oak Ridge Heights bus terminal. As he walked away, having secured a promise that all evidence would be destroyed, Thaddeus felt a mix of relief and deepening dread. Who was behind this? Could they trust that it was truly over? The blackmail incident left both men shaken. What had once been an exhilarating secret was now a source of constant fear. Every unexpected phone call, every lingering glance from a stranger on the street became a potential threat. The passion that had fueled their affair was now tempered by paranoia. Moreover, the financial strain of the blackmail payment introduced new tensions. Luke, forced to explain the sudden loan to his business partners, found himself entangled in more lies. Thaddeus, his savings depleted, began to take on more clients and longer hours, leaving less time for their clandestine meetings. As they grappled with these new realities, neither man realized that their actions had not gone unnoticed. The withdrawn funds, the secretive meetings, the sudden changes in behavior, all of these had caught the attention of someone much closer to home. Julia Ashworth, her suspicions now a raging fire, had decided it was time to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Driven by a mixture of suspicion, hurt, and determination, Julia Ashworth embarked on a mission to uncover the truth behind her husband's increasingly erratic behavior. Her first step was to hire Rhonda Vesper, a discreet but highly effective private investigator recommended by a fellow socialite who had gone through a messy divorce. Rhonda began her investigation with meticulous precision. She set up surveillance on Luke, tracking his movements and photographing his encounters. Initially, the evidence seemed innocuous: long hours at the office, business meetings at upscale restaurants, and frequent visits to the gym. However, as days turned into weeks, patterns began to emerge that didn't quite add up. Luke's supposed late-night meetings often coincided with times when Thaddeus's car was spotted in the vicinity. The gym visits extended far beyond reasonable workout times, with Luke and Thaddeus frequently leaving within minutes of each other. Rhonda's photographs captured lingering glances and seemingly casual touches that hinted at a deeper connection. As Rhonda dug deeper, she uncovered financial discrepancies that raised further red flags. The large unexplained loan Luke had taken out, coupled with numerous cash withdrawals from both men's accounts, pointed to some sort of shared secret or mutual blackmail. Julia, upon receiving Rhonda's detailed reports, felt her world crumbling around her. The possibility that Luke was having an affair was painful enough, but the realization that it might be with Thaddeus, a man she had trusted and confided in, was almost unbearable. Determined to gather irrefutable evidence, Julia took matters into her own hands. She installed a hidden camera in Luke's home office and placed a discreet tracking device on his car. She began to pay closer attention to Thaddeus during their training sessions, noting how he skillfully deflected questions about Luke's fitness progress. The final piece of evidence came on a Tuesday afternoon, when Julia, acting on a hunch, decided to surprise Luke at his office. As she approached his private conference room, she heard muffled voices. Peering through a crack in the door, she saw Luke and Thaddeus in an intimate embrace, their conversation a mix of endearments and worried whispers about someone who was watching them. In that moment, as her suspicions were confirmed in the most painful way possible, Julia felt a surge of emotions, betrayal, anger, and a steely resolve. She quietly retreated, her mind racing with plans for confrontation and retribution. The stage was set for a showdown that would change all of their lives forever. The day of reckoning arrived on a stormy Friday evening. Julia, armed with a folder full of evidence and a heart full of rage, waited for Luke in their expansive living room. She had sent the household staff away for the weekend, ensuring complete privacy for what she knew would be an explosive confrontation. When Luke walked through the door, shaking rain from his coat, he was met with an icy stare from his wife. Julia, her voice eerily calm, asked him to sit down. Confused and slightly alarmed by her demeanor, Luke complied, his mind racing to recall if he had forgotten an important date or event. Julia began by sliding the folder across the coffee table. As Luke opened it, his face drained of color. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and a detailed timeline of his affair with Thaddeus. Julia watched, her composure cracking, as Luke's expression cycled through shock, shame, and finally desperate denial. "Luke, you've been lying to me for months," Julia said, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. Luke, realizing the futility of further deception, attempted to explain. He spoke of feeling trapped, of rediscovering himself, of the unexpected connection he had found with Thaddeus. His words, meant to clarify, only stoked the fires of Julia's anger. The argument escalated quickly. Years of unspoken resentments and frustrations poured out. Julia hurled accusations of betrayal and selfishness, while Luke countered with complaints of emotional distance and feeling unfulfilled. The elegant living room, usually a showcase of their perfect life, now echoed with harsh words and bitter recriminations. As the confrontation reached a fever pitch, the doorbell rang. Julia, her face flushed with anger, strode to answer it, expecting to find a concerned neighbor drawn by the shouting. Instead, she found Thaddeus on the doorstep, soaked from the rain and wearing an expression of confusion and alarm. Seizing his arm, Julia dragged Thaddeus into the house, forcing a three-way confrontation. Thaddeus, caught off guard, looked to Luke for guidance but found only panic in his lover's eyes. The atmosphere in the room shifted from anger to something more dangerous, a volatile mix of fear, jealousy, and desperation. Julia demanded answers from Thaddeus, her words laced with venom. She accused him of manipulating his way into their lives, of using his position as her trainer to seduce her husband. Thaddeus, his usual confidence shattered, attempted to defend himself, but his words seemed hollow in the face of Julia's fury. Luke, seeing Thaddeus under attack, felt a surge of protectiveness. He moved to stand between his wife and his lover, a gesture that only inflamed Julia's rage. In a moment of blind anger, she grabbed a heavy crystal vase from a nearby table and swung it at Luke. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but would have repercussions that would last a lifetime. Luke, instinctively ducking, caused the vase to miss him and strike Thaddeus squarely on the temple. The impact was sickeningly loud in the sudden silence that followed. Thaddeus staggered, his eyes unfocused, before collapsing to the floor. Blood began to pool around his head, staining the expensive Persian rug a deep crimson. Julia and Luke stood frozen, the gravity of what had just occurred slowly sinking in. In that moment, as the storm raged outside and Thaddeus lay motionless on their living room floor, the lives of all three were irrevocably altered. The perfect facade of Oak Ridge Heights' golden couple had not just cracked, it had shattered completely, with consequences none of them could have foreseen. The moments following Thaddeus's collapse were a blur of panic and frantic activity. Luke, his legal training kicking in despite the shock, immediately called 911. Julia, her anger evaporating into horror, attempted to stem the bleeding with a nearby throw pillow, her trembling hands quickly becoming stained with Thaddeus's blood. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their sirens piercing the quiet suburban night. They worked efficiently, assessing Thaddeus's condition with grim expressions. Despite their best efforts, it was clear that the situation was dire. The blow to Thaddeus's temple had caused severe trauma, and he remained unresponsive as they prepared him for transport. As the ambulance sped away, its lights flashing in the rain-slicked streets, Luke and Julia were left to face the aftermath of their actions. The living room, once a showcase of their perfect life, now resembled a crime scene. Blood stained the expensive rug. The overturned furniture bore witness to their violent confrontation, and shards of the crystal vase glittered ominously in the dim light. At the hospital, a team of doctors fought to save Thaddeus's life. Hours passed in a haze of tense waiting and hushed conversations. Luke and Julia sat in separate corners of the waiting room, the weight of their shared secret and mutual recriminations keeping them apart, even in this moment of crisis. As dawn broke, a somber-faced doctor approached them. Despite all efforts, Thaddeus had succumbed to his injuries. The blunt force trauma to his head had caused irreparable brain damage, and he had slipped away in the early hours of the morning. The news hit Luke and Julia like a physical blow. In the span of a few hours, their lives had been upended in ways they could never have imagined. Their perfect world had not only been revealed as a facade, but had crumbled entirely, leaving a man dead in its wake. As they sat in stunned silence, the reality of their situation began to sink in. This was no longer just about an affair or a betrayed marriage. They were now at the center of a potential homicide investigation. The sound of approaching footsteps broke their reverie. Two police officers, their faces serious, were walking towards them. In that moment, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, Luke and Julia Ashworth knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The golden couple of Oak Ridge Heights was about to face a reckoning that would shake their community to its core. The death of Thaddeus Bracey quickly became the focus of an intense police investigation. Detective Imogen Sloan, a veteran of the Oak Ridge Heights Police Department, was assigned to lead the case. Known for her sharp intellect and unwavering dedication, Detective Sloan approached the investigation with meticulous care. The Ashworth residence was cordoned off as a crime scene, with forensic teams combing through every inch of the property. The crystal vase, now a crucial piece of evidence, was carefully bagged and sent for analysis. Flood spatter patterns were studied, and every surface was dusted for fingerprints. Luke and Julia were subjected to hours of grueling interrogations. Their statements, initially given separately, were cross-referenced and scrutinized for inconsistencies. The couple's attempt to present a united front quickly crumbled under Detective Sloan's skilled questioning. As the investigation deepened, more details emerged. The financial transactions related to the blackmail came to light, adding another layer of complexity to the case. Thaddeus's past, including his military service and the mysterious incident that led to his discharge, became subjects of intense scrutiny. Detective Sloan also focused on the wider circle of Oak Ridge Heights society. Interviews with the Ashworths' friends, neighbors, and business associates painted a picture of a couple whose perfect image had been carefully cultivated, but was far from reality. As weeks passed, the investigation began to point towards a charge of involuntary manslaughter. The evidence suggested that while Thaddeus's death was not premeditated, it was the direct result of Julia's actions during a heated confrontation. The stage was set for a trial that would captivate the nation and tear apart the fabric of Oak Ridge Heights high society. Julia's defense team, headed by the high-profile attorney Jameson Drake, argued that the death was a tragic accident, the result of a highly emotional confrontation rather than any intent to harm. They emphasized Julia's philanthropic work and standing in the community, portraying her as a victim of her husband's infidelity who had acted out of character in a moment of extreme distress. The trial lasted 4 weeks, captivating the nation with its mix of sex, betrayal, and suburban scandal. Luke's testimony proved particularly damaging as he struggled to reconcile his loyalty to Julia with the truth of his affair with Thaddeus. In the end, the jury found Julia guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The judge, taking into account her lack of prior criminal history and the circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, a decision that sparked debate about privilege and justice in America. Luke, while not criminally charged, faced civil lawsuits from Thaddeus's family and the collapse of his business empire as clients distanced themselves from the scandal. As Julia was led away to begin her sentence, the once golden couple of Oak Ridge Heights had been reduced to cautionary tales, their fall from grace complete and irreversible. Randall Mamet, a successful businessman, his wife Sydney, a dedicated homemaker, and Sydney's daughter from a previous marriage, Celeste, lived in a sprawling house. Their neighbors saw them as the perfect family, affluent, attractive, and seemingly happy. But beneath the polished exterior of manicured lawns and dinner parties, a sinister undercurrent was about to pull the Mamets into a vortex of forbidden desire, betrayal, and ultimately, violence. What began as a typical case of marital discontent would spiral into a shocking tale of taboo romance between stepfather and stepdaughter, culminating in a confrontation that ended in twisted death and others' lives shattered beyond repair. Randall and Sydney Mamet's romance began like many others, with a chance encounter at a charity gala in Philadelphia in the spring of 2010. Randall, then 35, was a rising star in the world of finance, known for his sharp mind and charismatic personality. Sydney, 32 at the time, was a divorcee with a young daughter, working as an interior designer for wealthy clients. Their whirlwind courtship captivated their social circle. Randall was smitten by Sydney's elegance and wit, while Sydney saw in Randall the stability and success she craved after her tumultuous first marriage. Within 6 months, Randall had proposed, presenting Sydney with a dazzling diamond ring that became the envy of their friends. The wedding, held at the prestigious Rittenhouse Hotel, was the social event of the season. Sydney's 7-year-old daughter, Celeste, served as the flower girl, her cherubic face beaming as she watched her mother marry the man who would become her stepfather. For the first few years, the Mamets seemed to thrive. Randall's career continued to soar, and he was soon made partner at his firm. Sydney threw herself into the role of the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and charity events that cemented their status in elite circles. She doted on Celeste, ensuring the girl wanted for nothing, from the best schools to extravagant vacations. But as the novelty of their new life together wore off, cracks began to appear in the foundation of their marriage. Randall's long hours at the office and frequent business trips left Sydney feeling neglected. She had given up her career to support his, and now found herself increasingly isolated in their large, empty house. Sydney's attempts to rekindle the romance were met with indifference from Randall, who seemed more interested in his spreadsheets than his wife. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, became terse exchanges about household matters and Celeste's school schedule. By the time Celeste entered high school, the Mamets' marriage existed mostly for show. They slept in separate bedrooms, citing Randall's snoring as the reason to curious friends. Their interactions were cordial but cold, like business partners rather than loving spouses. Sydney threw herself into volunteer work and her role as Celeste's mother, living vicariously through her daughter's achievements and social life. Randall buried himself deeper in his work, taking on more responsibilities at the firm and spending even less time at home. Neither was willing to admit defeat and file for divorce. Their shared fear of scandal, the comfort of their lifestyle, and concern for how it would affect Celeste kept them trapped in their loveless union. Little did they know that their carefully maintained facade was about to crumble in the most unexpected and tragic way. As Celeste blossomed from a precocious child into a striking young woman, the dynamics in the Mamet household began to shift. Now 18 and preparing for college, Celeste had inherited her mother's grace and her biological father's vivacious spirit. Celeste's relationship with her mother had always been close, if sometimes strained by Sydney's tendency to overprotect and live through her daughter's experiences. With Randall, however, things had been more complicated. In the early years of the marriage, he had been a doting stepfather, attending her recitals and helping with homework. But as his marriage to Sydney cooled, so did his interactions with Celeste. That changed during Celeste's senior year of high school. Randall,
perhaps feeling the weight of his own mortality as he approached 50, began to take a renewed interest in his stepdaughter's life. He attended her dance performances, beaming with pride from the audience. He engaged her in conversations about her college plans, offering advice on majors and career paths. Sydney, at first, was pleased to see Randall finally acting like part of the family again. She encouraged the father-daughter bonding, hoping it might somehow bridge the gulf in their marriage. But as the months wore on, she began to sense something unsettling in the way Randall looked at Celeste, in the way their conversations would stop abruptly when she entered a room. Celeste, for her part, found herself drawn to Randall in a way that both excited and confused her. His attention made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before. She began to dress more carefully when she knew he'd be home, to seek out his company under the guise of needing help with college applications or financial advice. The tension in the house grew palpable. Family dinners became a minefield of loaded glances and double entendres. Sydney watched with growing unease as her daughter and husband orbited each other, their gravitational pull seeming to exclude her entirely. As Celeste's high school graduation approached, the Mammoth house was a powder keg of unspoken desires and simmering resentments. None of them could have predicted the explosion that was to come, or the devastating aftermath that would follow. The line between appropriate stepfather-stepdaughter affection and something more sinister was crossed on a rainy night in April, just weeks before Celeste's graduation. Sydney was out of town for a charity event, leaving Randall and Celeste alone in the house. They had settled in to watch a movie, a bottle of wine between them. Randall reasoning that at 18 Celeste was old enough for a glass or two under parental supervision. As the wine flowed and the storm raged outside, their inhibitions lowered. Celeste, emboldened by alcohol and the charged atmosphere, confessed to Randall that she had always found him attractive. Randall, his judgment clouded and his loneliness overwhelming, responded not with the fatherly dismissal he should have, but with a confession of his own growing feelings. One touch led to another, and soon they found themselves entangled on the couch, years of suppressed attraction exploding into a passionate encounter. The next morning brought with it shame, confusion, and the thrill of forbidden fruit tasted. Both Randall and Celeste swore it would never happen again, that it was a mistake born of loneliness and wine. But the dam had broken, and the flood of desire was not so easily contained. Stolen glances became stolen kisses, furtive touches beneath the dinner table, coded text messages arranging clandestine meetings. They justified their actions to themselves and each other. Randall wasn't Celeste's real father, they reasoned. Sydney had been cold and distant for years. They were both consenting adults. Love, they told each other, couldn't be wrong. But the guilt gnawed at them, particularly Celeste. She saw the pain in her mother's eyes, the growing suspicion. She knew the devastating impact this would have if discovered, yet she couldn't bring herself to end it, addicted to the rush of their forbidden romance. Randall compartmentalized, as he did with all aspects of his life. When with Sydney, he played the role of distant but dutiful husband. With his colleagues, he was the consummate professional. But in those secret moments with Celeste, he allowed himself to feel a passion he thought he had lost forever. Their trysts became more frequent and daring as the weeks passed. A rendezvous at a motel on the outskirts of town, under the guise of college tours. Heated encounters in Randall's car, parked in secluded spots. Each time they swore it would be the last. Each time they found themselves drawn back together, powerless against the pull of their illicit desire. But as spring turned to summer, the web of lies they had woven began to tangle, threatening to ensnare them all. As Celeste's freshman year of college approached, the affair between her and Randall intensified. The impending separation seemed to fuel their passion, each encounter tinged with a desperate urgency. They began taking greater risks, their need for each other overriding their caution. Randall started finding excuses to visit Celeste at her college campus, a mere 2-hour drive away. He would claim business meetings in the area, when in reality he was spending long, luxurious afternoons tangled in the sheets of Celeste's dorm room. Celeste, for her part, would invent study groups and extracurricular activities to explain her frequent trips home on weekends. Their behavior began to impact their relationships with others. Randall grew even more distant from Sydney, barely able to look at her without feeling a stab of guilt. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, using it as both an escape and an excuse for his absences. Celeste struggled to connect with her college peers, always holding back, always guarding her explosive secret.
The affair also began to change them as individuals. Randall, reinvigorated by his relationship with Celeste, started paying more attention to his appearance. He joined a gym, updated his wardrobe, even contemplated hair restoration treatments. His colleagues remarked on his newfound energy, assuming he had finally found work-life balance. Celeste, meanwhile, found herself torn between exhilaration and shame. She excelled in her studies, channeling her turbulent emotions into her coursework, but her social life suffered. She rebuffed advances from classmates, unable to contemplate a normal relationship while entangled with her stepfather. There were close calls that should have served as wake-up calls. Once, Sydney nearly walked in on them in a compromising position in the pool house, saved only by a well-timed phone call that delayed her arrival home. Another time, one of Celeste's dormmates spotted Randall leaving her room early in the morning, leading to awkward questions that Celeste clumsily deflected. Despite these near misses, Randall and Celeste convinced themselves they could maintain their secret indefinitely. They began making tentative plans for a future together, whispering about the day when they could finally be open about their love. Randall spoke of divorcing Sydney, of starting a new life with Celeste once she finished college. Celeste daydreamed about a fairy tale wedding, conveniently ignoring the devastation it would wreak on her mother. But as their fantasy future grew more elaborate, so did the tangled web of lies required to sustain their present. Randall's finances came under scrutiny at home as Sydney questioned the increased business expenses and mysterious cash withdrawals. Celeste's academic performance, while still strong, began to slip as the stress of her double life took its toll. The pressure began to mount, the cracks in their carefully constructed facade widening day by day. Still they persisted, each stolen moment together reinforcing their belief that their love was worth any cost. They failed to see that the price would be far higher than either of them could have imagined, and that the bill was coming due far sooner than they knew. It was during a lunch with her friend Beatrice that the first inkling of the terrible truth began to form in Sydney's mind. Beatrice, ever the gossip, mentioned offhandedly that she'd seen Randall and Celeste having an intense conversation at a cafe in town, at a time when Celeste was supposed to be at college and Randall at work. The way Beatrice described their body language, leaning in close, hands touching on the table, sent a chill down Sydney's spine. She brushed it off, laughing too loudly and changing the subject, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. From that moment on, Sydney began to pay closer attention to the interactions between her husband and daughter. She noticed the lingering glances, the inside jokes she wasn't privy to, the way they always seemed to find reasons to be alone together. As the evidence mounted, Sydney found herself trapped in a state of denial. The alternative was too horrible to contemplate, but with each passing day, the truth she didn't want to face inched closer to the surface, threatening to explode into the open and shatter their lives forever. The day Sydney's world imploded started like any other. It was a warm June morning, the air heavy with the promise of summer storms. Sydney had plans to meet friends for lunch, but a last-minute cancellation left her with an unexpected free afternoon. On a whim, she decided to surprise Randall at his office, perhaps suggest an impromptu date night to rekindle their faltering connection. But Randall wasn't in his office. His assistant, flustered by Sydney's unexpected appearance, let slip that Mr. Mamet had left early, mentioning something about a family emergency. Sydney felt her blood run cold. There was no family emergency she knew of. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and opened the tracking app she'd installed weeks ago in a moment of paranoid weakness. The pulsing dot of Randall's location appeared not at home, not at any hospital, but at a nondescript address on the outskirts of town. The drive to that address was a blur. Sydney moved on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities, each more devastating than the last. She pulled up to a small motel, the kind that rented rooms by the hour, and there in the parking lot was Randall's car. Sydney sat in her vehicle, paralyzed with indecision. Did she really want to know? Couldn't she just drive away, pretend she'd never seen this? But then another car pulled into the lot, Celeste's beat-up college Honda. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sydney watched her daughter hurry across the parking lot and knock on one of the motel room doors. It opened, Randall's familiar silhouette visible for a moment before Celeste slipped inside. Sydney sat in stunned silence, her mind refusing to process what her eyes had just witnessed. Seconds stretched into minutes as she stared at the closed motel room door, willing it to be some sort of mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but the betrayal it so clearly was. Finally,
Operating on instinct rather than conscious thought, Sydney got out of her car. She raised her hand to knock, then paused, her fist trembling in midair. From inside, she could hear muffled laughter, Celeste's musical giggle, Randall's deeper chuckle. The sounds of happiness and intimacy twisted like a knife in her gut. With a deep breath, Sydney steeled herself and rapped sharply on the door. The laughter inside abruptly ceased, replaced by hushed, panicked whispers. She knocked again, louder this time, her calm facade cracking as she called out. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before she heard movement inside. The door opened slowly, revealing Randall, his hair mussed and shirt hastily buttoned. Behind him, Sydney could see Celeste, her face a mask of guilt and fear. In that moment, as Sydney looked from her husband to her daughter, the full weight of their betrayal came crashing down upon her. Her world, already fragile, shattered completely. The tension in the small motel room was suffocating as Sydney stepped inside, her eyes darting between Randall and Celeste. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ancient air conditioner and the pounding of Sydney's heart in her ears. Randall was the first to break the silence, his voice strained as he attempted to explain. But Sydney cut him off, her voice eerily calm. Randall stepped forward, attempting to shield Celeste. "Sydney, please. This isn't Celeste's fault." A harsh laugh escaped Sydney's lips. The argument escalated quickly, years of pent-up resentment and betrayal pouring out. Accusations flew back and forth. Sydney accused Randall of grooming Celeste, of taking advantage of her youth and innocence. Randall defended their relationship, insisting it was real love, that Celeste is an adult now. Celeste, caught between her mother and the man she thought she loved, tried desperately to mediate. She pleaded with Sydney to understand, swore that Randall had never taken advantage of her, that their feelings were mutual. But Sydney was beyond reason. In her eyes, this was the ultimate betrayal, not just of her as a wife, but as a mother. As the shouting reached a fever pitch, Sydney noticed Randall inching towards the bedside table. She saw the glint of metal and realized with a jolt of fear that he was reaching for something. The gun he always kept for protection. Time seemed to slow down. Sydney lunged for Randall, determined to stop him from doing something unthinkable. Celeste, seeing her mother's sudden movement, misinterpreted it as an attack on Randall and tried to intervene. In the ensuing scuffle, the gun went off. The sound of the shot was deafening in the small room. For a moment, everything went still. Then Celeste crumpled to the floor, a red stain blossoming on her shirt. Sydney's scream of anguish shattered the silence. Randall stood frozen, the gun slipping from his nerveless fingers. As Sydney frantically tried to stem the blood flowing from her daughter's wound, the full horror of what had happened began to sink in. Their secret was out, and the consequences were far more devastating than any of them could have imagined. The gunshot at the motel brought a swift response from local law enforcement. Within minutes, the small parking lot was awash in flashing lights as police cars and an ambulance converged on the scene. First responders found a tableau of tragedy in room 114. Celeste lay on the floor, barely clinging to life despite Sydney's desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. Randall Mamet sat slumped in a corner, his eyes vacant, the gun still on the floor where he had dropped it. Sydney, her hands and clothes covered in her daughter's blood, alternated between frantic pleas to the paramedics and incoherent sobs. Detective Liam Donovan, a veteran of the small police force, took charge of the scene. As Celeste was rushed to the hospital, Donovan began the grim task of piecing together what had happened in that motel room. The physical evidence was clear enough. One shot fired, one victim, the gun registered to Randall Mamet. But the why of it all was murkier. Initial questioning of Sydney and Randall yielded conflicting stories, both too distraught to provide a coherent account of events. As news of the shooting spread, the quiet community was rocked by shock and disbelief. The Mamets had always seemed like the perfect family, successful, respected, involved in local charities. The idea that such violence could erupt among them was almost inconceivable to their neighbors and friends. In the days that followed, as Celeste fought for her life in the ICU, Detective Donovan and his team worked tirelessly to unravel the truth. They combed through phone records, interviewed friends and colleagues, and dug into the family's background. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of a family not nearly as perfect as their polished exterior suggested. As Detective Donovan delved deeper into the Mamet case, the facade of the perfect family crumbled rapidly. Interviews with family friends and colleagues painted a picture of a marriage long devoid of love, held together by appearances
and financial convenience. Beatrice Whitaker, Sydney's closest friend, provided crucial information about Sydney's growing suspicions in the months leading up to the shooting. She recounted tearful lunches where Sydney had confided her fears about Randall's possible infidelity, never suspecting the true nature of his betrayal. Randall's co-workers described a man who had seemed rejuvenated in recent months, speaking often of a new love in his life. They had assumed he was having a typical midlife crisis affair, never imagining the object of his affection was his own stepdaughter. But it was Celeste's college roommate who provided the most damning evidence. Once assured of police confidentiality, Zoe shared a trove of text messages Celeste had sent her, detailing the affair with Randall in the sort of giddy, love-struck language typical of a young woman in the throes of what she believed to be true love. The digital trail proved to be a goldmine for investigators. Subpoenaed phone records showed hundreds of calls and messages between Randall and Celeste, often at odd hours. Financial records showed a pattern of expensive gifts from Randall to Celeste, jewelry, designer clothes, even a car, all carefully hidden from Sydney. There were records of hotel stays, weekend getaways disguised as business trips or college visits. As the evidence mounted, the full extent of Randall and Celeste's deception became clear. This was no sudden passion, no momentary lapse in judgment. Their affair had been going on for over a year, meticulously planned and hidden from Sydney and the world. The revelation of the affair shed new light on the events in the motel room. What had first appeared to be a case of accidental discharge during a heated argument now looked more like a potential crime of passion. As Celeste slowly recovered in the hospital, the question on everyone's mind was, who had really pulled the trigger? Was it Randall attempting to silence Celeste to save himself? Sydney in a fit of rage at their betrayal? Or Celeste herself, overcome with guilt and shame when confronted by her mother? The truth, Detective Donovan suspected, might be more complex than any of them had initially thought. District Attorney took personal charge of the case. After reviewing the evidence gathered by Detective Donovan and his team, she made the decision to charge both Randall and Sydney Mamet with attempted murder. Randall, once the picture of corporate success, appeared haggard and defeated in his orange jumpsuit. His defense team, led by high-powered attorney Xavier Brockton, argued that the shooting had been a tragic accident, the result of a struggle for the gun during a heated family argument. Sydney, by contrast, seemed to have aged years in the weeks since the incident. Her lawyer painted her as a victim, a woman betrayed by her husband and daughter, who had acted in self-defense when she believed Randall was reaching for the gun to silence them both. The question of Celeste's role in the incident loomed large over the proceedings. As the only witness to the shooting besides her parents, her testimony would be crucial. But Celeste, still recovering from her injuries, had so far invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to testify against either parent. In the end, Randall Mamet accepted the plea deal. In a hushed courtroom, he pleaded guilty to aggravated assault, receiving a sentence of 10 years in prison. As he was led away in handcuffs, he locked eyes with Sydney one last time, a look that spoke volumes about the pain, betrayal, and regret that had torn their family apart. Sydney, charges against her dropped, left the courthouse a free woman, but one irrevocably changed by the ordeal. Within months, she had sold the family home and moved out of state, seeking a fresh start away from the whispers and sidelong glances. Celeste, once she recovered from her physical wounds, faced the daunting task of healing her emotional and psychological scars. She withdrew from college, entering intensive therapy to deal with the trauma of the shooting and the complicated emotions surrounding her relationship with Randall. Her relationship with Sydney remained strained. The breach of trust between mother and daughter, a chasm not easily bridged. The Mamet case faded from the national spotlight, but its impact lingered. It served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most picture-perfect families can harbor dark secrets. The community, shaken by the violence that had erupted in their midst, began initiatives to address domestic violence and promote healthier family dynamics. The Hargroves and the Velasquez families, to all outward appearances, were living the American dream. Their manicured lawns and hybrid cars in the driveways gave no hint of the tempest brewing behind closed doors. Liam and Rachel Hargrove had been college sweethearts, married for 15 years. Liam, a software engineer for a local tech startup, was known for his dry wit and passion for homebrewing. Rachel, a pediatric nurse, volunteered at the neighborhood watch and was always ready with a plate of her famous lavender shortbread for new neighbors. They were the couple others looked to as a model of stability and success. Just 2 doors down lived Rafael and Marisol Velasquez. Rafael, a charismatic restaurateur, had moved from Mexico City a decade ago to open what would become the hottest fusion taqueria. His wife Marisol, a yoga instructor and part-time translator, was beloved for her vibrant energy and warm hugs. Their whirlwind romance had culminated in a beachside wedding in Tulum just 5 years prior. The two couples had become fast friends shortly after the Velasquez moved in, bonding over weekend barbecues and a shared love for wineries. They vacationed together and celebrated holidays as a unit. To their friends and neighbors, they were the picture of modern multicultural friendship. But beneath the surface of potlucks and game nights, a current of restlessness was growing, a longing for excitement, for newness, for the spark that had faded in the routines of married life. It was this unspoken desire that would lead them down a path from which there was no return. The idea first surfaced on a crisp autumn evening, as the 4 friends lounged in the Hargroves' hot tub, steam rising into the star-studded sky. The wine had been flowing freely, loosening tongues and lowering inhibitions. Rafael, always the jokester, had made a quip about wife-swapping that hung in the air a beat too long before nervous laughter dispersed it. But the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, the joke resurfaced, each time met with less laughter and more contemplative silence. It was Rachel who finally broached the subject seriously, during one of the couple's regular dinner dates. "We're all adults here," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands beneath the table. "Maybe there's something to this idea, a way to spice things up." The silence that followed was deafening. Marisol's eyes widened, darting between her husband and friends. Liam stared intently at his plate. It was Rafael who broke the tension, his usual grin replaced by a look of thoughtful consideration. The conversation that followed lasted deep into the night. Boundaries were discussed, scenarios explored, concerns voiced. Liam, initially the most hesitant, found himself warming to the idea as the others talked through the logistics. Marisol, surprisingly, was the most enthusiastic once the initial shock wore off. "It's just physical, right?" she said, her dark eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "No feelings involved, a temporary arrangement to explore and then return to our partners." They agreed to think it over individually, and as couples before making any decisions. The next week was filled with hushed conversations behind closed doors, furtive glances across the street, and more than one sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, imagining possibilities. When they reconvened, the decision was unanimous if tentative. They would try it, just once to see how it felt. Rules were established. A 1-month time frame, complete honesty with their original partners, and the freedom to call it off at any time if anyone felt uncomfortable. As they raised their glasses to seal the agreement, none of them could have foreseen the tragedy that would unfold from this moment of adventurous curiosity. The die was cast, and the wheel of fate had begun to turn. The agreed-upon evening arrived with a palpable tension in the air. The Hargroves' home, usually a warm and inviting space, felt charged with an electric anticipation. Liam had spent the afternoon obsessively cleaning, a nervous habit that manifested whenever he felt out of his depth. Rachel, meanwhile, had changed outfits no less than 5 times before settling on a simple black dress that hugged her curves. Across the street, Rafael and Marisol prepared with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Rafael, ever the showman, had set out candles and opened a bottle of expensive tequila he'd been saving for a special occasion. Marisol moved through her son's salutations, trying to center herself and calm the butterflies in her stomach. At precisely 8 p.m., as agreed, Rachel made the short walk to the Velasquez home. Her heart pounded with each step, a mixture of guilt and exhilaration coursing through her veins. Rafael greeted her at the door with a warm smile and a glass of tequila, which she accepted gratefully. Meanwhile, Marisol arrived at the Hargroves, a vision in a flowing red dress that seemed to accentuate her every movement. Liam, usually so composed, found himself fumbling with the wine opener, suddenly acutely aware of Marisol's presence in a way he'd never been before. The initial moments were awkward, filled with stilted small talk and nervous laughter. But as the alcohol flowed and the reality of their situation set in, the atmosphere began to shift. Raphael, ever the charmer, regaled Rachel with stories of his childhood, each tale bringing him physically closer to her on the couch. Rachel found herself captivated, not just by the stories, but by the passion with which he told them, so different from Liam's reserved nature. Across the street, Liam and Marisol had moved from the living room to the kitchen, where Marisol insisted on teaching Liam how to properly make guacamole. The simple act of chopping avocados became an intimate dance, their hands brushing against each other. As the night progressed, inhibitions lowered and desires rose to the surface. Raphael's hand found its way to Rachel's thigh, and she surprised herself by not pulling away. In the Hargrove kitchen, Liam found himself mesmerized by the graceful curves of Marisol. The transition from social interaction to physical intimacy was both abrupt and natural. A lingering look, a tentative touch, and suddenly they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Clothes were shed, breaths quickened, and in the dim light of bedrooms usually shared with other partners, new connections were forged. In the aftermath, as they lay in unfamiliar beds beside familiar friends, each participant grappled with a complex mix of emotions. Guilt, excitement, confusion, and a strange sense of loss all mingled together. As they drifted off to sleep, none of them realized that this night had set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. For in the dim light of the Hargrove bedroom, Liam had looked into Marisol's eyes and felt something stir within him that went far beyond the physical boundaries they had agreed upon. In the days following the swap, life in the Laurelhurst neighborhood seemed to return to its usual rhythm. Liam went back to his coding, Rachel to her patients, Raphael to his restaurant, and Marisol to her yoga studio. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a subtle shift had occurred, particularly within Liam Hargrove. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible. Liam found himself lingering a little longer at the window, his gaze drifting towards the Velasquez home. He began taking more frequent walks, timing them to coincide with Marisol's return from her yoga classes. His usual playlist of tech podcasts was replaced by the Latin music Raphael had introduced him to, the rhythms reminding him of Marisol. As weeks passed, these small changes became more pronounced. Liam's colleagues at the startup noticed his distraction, his usual laser focus on code, replaced by long periods of staring blankly at his screen. He began learning Spanish using a language app, telling Rachel it was for an upcoming project at work. Late at night, when sleep eluded him, he found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, lingering on group pictures where Marisol's smile seemed to outshine everything else. Liam tried to rationalize these feelings, to suppress the growing emotional attachment he felt towards Marisol. He reminded himself of the agreement, of the boundaries they had set. This was supposed to be a one-time thing, a purely physical exploration. But in quiet moments, he couldn't deny the warmth that spread through his chest when he thought of her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. The internal struggle began to manifest externally. Liam became irritable, snapping at Rachel over small issues. He threw himself into work, staying late at the office to avoid the temptation of seeking out Marisol's company. When the two couples did get together, Liam's behavior oscillated between overly attentive to Marisol and completely avoiding her, drawing curious glances from both Rachel and Raphael. One evening, as Liam lay awake beside a sleeping Rachel, the full weight of his emotions crashed over him. He realized, with a mix of exhilaration and horror, that he was falling in love with Marisol. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. He knew he should end it, should confess to Rachel and distance himself from Marisol, but the mere idea of never being close to her again felt like a physical pain in his chest. As dawn broke, Liam made a decision. He would try harder to suppress these feelings, to be the husband Rachel deserved. But even as he resolved this, a small part of him whispered that it was already too late. The seed of desire had been planted, and it was growing into something that couldn't be easily uprooted. As autumn gave way to winter, the once warm and easy friendship between the two couples began to cool. The change was subtle at first, manifesting in canceled plans and shorter, less frequent interactions. But as weeks passed, the tension became palpable, a silent presence at every gathering. Rachel was the first to notice the shift in her husband's behavior. Liam, once an open book to her, had become distant and guarded. She caught him checking his phone more frequently,
his face lighting up at certain notifications before quickly schooling his features back to neutrality. When she asked about his day, his answers became vague and evasive. During one of their now rare dinners with the Velasquez, Rachel couldn't help but notice the way Liam's eyes followed Marisol's every movement. Raphael, usually jovial and laid back, began to exhibit signs of stress. His legendary patience in the kitchen shortened, and staff at his restaurant whispered about his uncharacteristic outbursts. At home, he became possessive of Marisol in a way he'd never been before, questioning her about her daily activities and suggesting they spend less time with the Hargroves. Marisol, caught in the middle, found herself torn between her growing affection for Liam and her commitment to Raphael. She tried to maintain normalcy, suggesting double dates and neighborhood gatherings like before, but each interaction was fraught with unspoken tensions and loaded glances. The breaking point came at a neighborhood block party in early December. As holiday lights twinkled on every house, the four found themselves together for the first time in weeks. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by long silences and forced laughter. When Marisol excused herself to get a drink, Liam immediately offered to help, leaving Rachel and Raphael alone. Rachel, her suspicions finally boiling over, confronted Raphael. "Is there something going on between them?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. Raphael, his own jealousy and fears rising to the surface, lashed out defensively. "Maybe you should ask your husband that," he snapped back. Their heated exchange drew the attention of other partygoers, and by the time Liam and Marisol returned, they found their spouses in a tense standoff. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of awkward apologies and hasty goodbyes. That night in both households, long-avoided conversations finally took place. Accusations were made, denials issued, and tears shed. Rachel demanded answers from Liam, her voice cracking as she asked if he was in love with Marisol. Liam's hesitation before his denial was all the confirmation she needed. Across the street, Raphael's jealousy exploded into a rage that left Marisol shaken. His accusations of betrayal and demands for the truth echoed through their home, a jarring contrast to the peaceful life they'd built. As the night wore on, all four individuals grappled with the realization that their simple agreement had spiraled into something far more complicated and potentially destructive. The foundation of trust that had supported their friendships and marriages was crumbling, and in its place, a volatile mix of love, jealousy, and resentment was taking root. January 15th dawned cold and gray, a thick fog hanging over the town like a portent of the tragedy to come. The weeks following the block party confrontation had been tense, with both couples retreating into themselves, communication reduced to terse texts and avoided glances across the street. That evening, Liam sat in his home office, ostensibly working late but in reality lost in thoughts of Marisol. The sound of the front door opening and closing jolted him from his reverie. Rachel's voice, tight with barely controlled emotion, called out his name. In the living room, Liam found not just Rachel but Raphael and Marisol as well. The atmosphere was charged, Raphael's face a mask of barely contained fury, Marisol's eyes red-rimmed and pleading. Rachel stood apart, her posture rigid, arms crossed defensively across her chest. "We need to talk," Rachel began, her voice trembling slightly. "All of us. This has gone on long enough." What followed was a maelstrom of emotions, years of friendship, and months of hidden feelings exploding into the open. Raphael accused Liam of pursuing Marisol, of trying to steal her away. Rachel, tears streaming down her face, demanded to know how long the affair had been going on. Marisol, caught between her growing feelings for Liam and her loyalty to Raphael, tried desperately to calm the situation. Liam, overwhelmed by the onslaught, initially retreated into denial. But as the accusations flew and emotions heightened, something inside him snapped. In a moment of reckless honesty, he confessed his feelings for Marisol, his words cutting through the chaos like a knife. Raphael, his face contorting with rage, lunged at Liam. The two men grappled, years of friendship evaporating in an instant as fists flew and furniture toppled. Rachel screamed for them to stop, her pleas drowned out by the sounds of the struggle. Marisol tried to intervene, attempting to pull Raphael away, but was shoved aside in the chaos. In the frenzy, no one noticed Raphael's hand closing around a heavy crystal vase. It wasn't until the sickening thud of crystal meeting flesh and bone echoed through the room that everything froze. Liam crumpled to the ground, blood pooling rapidly around his head. The vase slipped from Raphael's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. For a moment, no one moved.
the scene before them too horrific to comprehend. It was Rachel who broke the paralysis, her nurse's training kicking in as she rushed to Liam's side. Her fingers frantically sought a pulse as she barked orders at the others to call 911. Marisol, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled with her phone, her tear-blurred vision making it hard to dial. Raphael stood motionless, his face a mask of shock and disbelief at what he had done. The sound of sirens in the distance broke through the haze, snapping him back to the horrifying reality of the situation. Paramedics arrived minutes later, but their efforts were in vain. Liam Hargrove was pronounced dead at the scene, his life extinguished in a moment of uncontrolled passion. As police cars pulled up, their flashing lights illuminating the quiet street, neighbors emerged from their homes drawn by the commotion. In the chaos that followed, statements were taken, evidence collected. Raphael, still in a state of shock, offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and led to a waiting police car. As dawn broke, the idyllic facade of Laurelhurst had been shattered. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the morning breeze, a stark contrast to the well-manicured lawns and cheerful holiday decorations that still adorned some homes. The investigation into Liam Hargrove's death began in earnest the following morning. Detective Amelia Schaefer, a veteran of Homicide Division, took charge of the case, unaware of the shocking plot twist that was about to be revealed. Her first step was to separate the three survivors, each sequestered in a different interview room at the precinct. Rachel Hargrove, still in shock, provided a disjointed account of the evening's events. She spoke of the growing tension between the couples, the suspicions that had eaten away at her for weeks. Her description of the fatal confrontation was punctuated by bouts of sobbing and long haunted silences. Marisol Velasquez, visibly distraught, initially refused to speak without a lawyer present. When one arrived, she gave a tearful confession about the affair with Liam, insisting that it had been emotional rather than physical since the initial swap. She described Raphael's increasing jealousy and controlling behavior in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Raphael Velasquez, advised by his lawyer to remain silent, sat stoically through initial questioning. However, as the hours wore on and the gravity of his situation became clear, he broke down. In a moment of raw honesty, he admitted to striking Liam but insisted he never meant to kill him. It was an accident, he repeated over and over, his voice hoarse with emotion. As statements were taken, forensic teams combed through both the Hargrove and Velasquez residences. They uncovered a series of text messages between Liam and Marisol, revealing the depth of their emotional entanglement. Emails drafts found on Liam's computer showed he had been contemplating leaving Rachel, adding another layer to the tragedy. The murder weapon, the crystal vase, was sent to the lab for analysis. Fingerprints matched Raphael's, and traces of Liam's blood and hair were found embedded in the shattered pieces. The force required to cause such catastrophic injury was consistent with Raphael's build and the rage described by witnesses. Neighbors were interviewed, painting a picture of two couples who had once been the cornerstone of the community. Many expressed shock, unable to reconcile the violent act with the friendly, successful people they thought they knew. As the investigation progressed, Detective Schaefer began to piece together a timeline of events. The initial wife swap, intended as a one-time exploration, had sparked an emotional affair between Liam and Marisol. This, in turn, had led to mounting tensions and suspicions, culminating in the fatal confrontation. The case, initially seeming straightforward, grew more complex as layers of motivation and circumstance were revealed. As the first week of the investigation drew to a close, Detective Schaefer stood before a board covered in photos, timelines, and connecting threads. The facts were clear, but the full truth of what had transpired in the Hargrove living room that fateful night remained elusive. The case was far from closed, and the ripples of this tragedy would continue to spread through the lives of all involved. As the investigation deepened, Detective Schaefer and her team began to uncover layers of complexity that went beyond the surface narrative. Delving into the backgrounds of all four individuals involved revealed hidden motivations and long-buried secrets that cast the events in a new light. Liam Hargrove, it emerged, had a history of depression that he had carefully hidden from all but Rachel. Interviews with his colleagues revealed a man who had been struggling with his work in recent months, his usual passion for coding replaced by a listlessness that many had attributed to simple burnout. A deeper dive into his medical records showed a recent change in antidepressant medication, one that came with warnings about increased impulsivity and mood swings. Rachel's perfected image of the devoted wife and nurse also began to crack under scrutiny. Former co-workers spoke of her intense ambition, of opportunities for advancement she had passed up to support Liam's career. Some hinted at resentment that had been building for years, carefully hidden behind a facade of contentment. Her enthusiastic suggestion of the wife swap began to look less like a spontaneous idea and more like a calculated risk to shake up her stagnant marriage. Rafael Velasquez's charismatic exterior concealed a man haunted by insecurities. Immigration records revealed a complicated history, with Rafael having overstayed a student visa years ago before marrying Marisol and gaining legal status. This precarious past had left him with a deep-seated fear of losing everything he had built, manifesting in his recent controlling behavior towards Marisol. Perhaps most surprisingly, Marisol's image as the carefree yoga instructor belied a woman with hidden depths. A sealed juvenile record from her teenage years in California hinted at a troubled past she had worked hard to overcome. Friends from before her marriage to Rafael described a passionate, often reckless young woman who had seemingly transformed herself into the picture of stability upon moving to Portland. As these details came to light, the narrative of the case shifted. What had initially seemed a straightforward crime of passion revealed itself to be the culmination of years of unspoken tensions, secret struggles, and unfulfilled desires. The wife swap agreement, far from being the catalyst, now appeared to be merely the spark that had ignited a powder keg of suppressed emotions and hidden resentments. Detective Schaefer found herself grappling with a case that defied easy categorization. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, with each person involved bearing some measure of responsibility for the tragedy that had unfolded. The trial of Rafael Velasquez for the murder of Liam Hargrove began on a rainy Monday in late spring, nearly 6 months after the fatal confrontation. Rafael, looking gaunt and somber in a dark suit, was led in by his defense team. Rachel Hargrove, still wearing her grief like a shroud, entered flanked by supportive colleagues. Marisol, who would be testifying for both the prosecution and the defense, slipped in through a side entrance, her once vibrant presence dimmed by months of guilt and public scrutiny. Inside the courtroom, District Attorney laid out the prosecution's case. She painted a picture of Rafael as a man consumed by jealousy, who had lashed out in a premeditated act of violence. The crystal vase, she argued, had been grabbed with intent, the fatal blow delivered with the full force of Rafael's rage. In contrast, Rafael's defense team presented their client as a man pushed to the breaking point. They spoke of the sanctity of marriage, of the betrayal Rafael had suffered, and of the confrontation as a moment of temporary insanity rather than calculated murder. Over the next 3 weeks, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts debated the force and angle of the fatal blow. Neighbors recounted the gradual shift in dynamics between the two couples. Colleagues and friends of both Liam and Rafael testified to their states of mind in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. As the trial neared its end, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned final arguments. The judge, taking into account Rafael's unique circumstances of the case, sentenced him to 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions, some feeling it was too lenient, others believing it appropriately balanced justice with mercy. Jennifer Ashcroft, a strikingly beautiful 52-year-old woman, had built her fortune in the cutthroat world of biotech. Her company was at the forefront of brain interface technology, and Jennifer was known for her razor-sharp intellect and unyielding determination. She moved through life with the confidence of someone who always got what she wanted, whether in the boardroom or the bedroom. A 20-year-old Ryan Breslin, with his brooding good looks, seemed an unlikely match for the poised and polished Jennifer. A college dropout with a troubled past, Ryan had drifted through a series of dead-end jobs before a chance encounter with Jennifer changed the trajectory of his life. Their relationship, while unconventional, appeared to offer both parties what they desired. For Jennifer, a vibrant young companion to stave off loneliness, and for Ryan, financial security, and a taste of luxury he had never known. For nearly a year, their arrangement flourished in the shadows of Riverton. But as summer gave way to autumn, A shift in their delicate dynamic would set in motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed, leaving the community to grapple with the dark undercurrents that had been flowing beneath its pristine surface all along. Jennifer Ashcroft's path to wealth and power began in the middle-class suburbs of Boston. Born to a high school chemistry teacher and a librarian, young Jennifer showed an early aptitude for science and an insatiable curiosity about the human mind. Her parents, recognizing her potential, scrimped and saved to provide her with every educational opportunity they could afford. At 16, Jennifer's life took a dramatic turn when her science fair project on neurotransmitters caught the eye of a visiting professor from MIT. Impressed by her precocious talent, he became her mentor, guiding her through accelerated studies and into the prestigious neuroscience program at MIT. It was here that Jennifer's ambition truly took flight. During her graduate studies, Jennifer's research into neuroplasticity attracted the attention of several biotech startups. By 25, she had secured her first patent, a fledgling company working on brain-computer interfaces. Under Jennifer's leadership, the company flourished, its stock price soaring as breakthroughs in the technology made headlines. With each success, Jennifer's wealth and influence grew, but so did her reputation for ruthlessness. Former colleagues spoke in hushed tones of her ability to charm and manipulate, to identify weaknesses and exploit them mercilessly. Jennifer's personal life was marked by a series of short-lived marriages, each ending as her partners found themselves unable to compete with her true passion, her work. Her first husband, a fellow researcher she met at MIT, lasted 3 years before filing for divorce, citing emotional neglect. The second, a charming venture capitalist, made it to year 5 before Jennifer's suspicions of his infidelity led to an acrimonious split. After her third divorce at 48, from a younger art dealer who claimed she had become obsessively controlling, Jennifer swore off traditional relationships. Instead, she began to seek out the company of much younger men, drawn to their vitality and the uncomplicated nature of purely transactional arrangements. It was a lifestyle that suited her, allowing her to maintain control while satisfying her needs for companionship and physical intimacy. Yet as Jennifer approached her 50s, a creeping sense of loneliness began to gnaw at her. It was this vulnerability, carefully hidden beneath her polished exterior, that would leave her susceptible to the intoxicating allure of Ryan Breslin and the destructive jealousy that would follow. Ryan Breslin's early life stood in stark contrast to Jennifer's. Born in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, Ryan was the youngest of 4 children in a family perpetually teetering on the edge of poverty. His father, a long-haul trucker with a penchant for alcohol, was rarely home. His mother, overwhelmed and battling depression, struggled to keep the family afloat. From a young age, Ryan learned to fend for himself. Blessed with good looks and natural charm, he discovered early on that these attributes could be leveraged to his advantage. By high school, Ryan had perfected the art of getting by with minimal effort, relying on his charisma to smooth over his academic shortcomings and disciplinary issues. Despite his lackluster academic performance, Ryan's SAT scores were surprisingly high, hinting at an intelligence he rarely applied to his studies. This, combined with his prowess on the basketball court, earned him a scholarship to a small liberal arts college in Philadelphia. However, the freedom of college life proved too tempting for Ryan. Away from the watchful eyes of his family and high school teachers, he fell in with a party crowd. His grades plummeted, and by the end of his freshman year, Ryan had lost his scholarship. Too ashamed to return home, he decided to stay in Philadelphia, bouncing between low-wage jobs and crashing on friends' couches. It was during this aimless period that Ryan's path intersected with Jennifer's. Working as a barista in an upscale cafe frequented by business executives, Ryan caught Jennifer's eye one rainy Tuesday morning. She was struck by his easy smile and the hint of vulnerability behind his confident demeanor. For Ryan, Jennifer represented everything he thought he wanted: sophistication, success, and the promise of a life far removed from his humble beginnings. Their initial flirtation quickly evolved into something more. Jennifer, intrigued by Ryan's raw potential and eager to shape him into her ideal companion, offered him a proposition. She would provide him with financial support, introduce him to her world of luxury and refinement in exchange for his exclusive companionship. For Ryan, faced with mounting debts and dwindling prospects, the offer seemed too good to refuse. Seizing the opportunity, Jennifer invited him as her guest, her tone making it clear that this was more than a casual invitation. The gallery opening marked the beginning of Ryan's induction into Jennifer's world. She arrived at his shabby apartment, presenting him with a tailored suit that fit him perfectly. As they moved through the event, Jennifer expertly guided Ryan, whispering explanations about the art and introducing him to her circles as her young protégé. For Ryan, the evening was intoxicating. He found himself easily slipping into the role of the charming, artistic young man, feeding off the approving glances and engaging conversations with Jennifer's peers. As the night wore on, the attraction between them grew palpable, culminating in a passionate encounter back at Jennifer's penthouse. In the afterglow, Jennifer laid out her proposition. She would provide Ryan with a generous monthly allowance, pay for his education if he chose to return to college, and introduce him to opportunities he could only dream of. In return, she expected his companionship, discretion, and exclusivity. Ryan, seeing a chance to reinvent himself and escape his directionless existence, agreed without hesitation. The following months were a whirlwind for Ryan. Jennifer moved him into the guest house on her estate, replacing his wardrobe with designer labels and introducing him to the finer things in life. She enrolled him in art appreciation classes, hired a personal trainer to hone his already impressive physique, and taught him the nuances of wine tasting and fine dining. Jennifer took immense pleasure in molding Ryan, viewing him as both a project and a prized possession. She reveled in the envious glances they received when they attended events together, proudly showing off her attractive young companion. For Ryan, the relationship offered security and excitement in equal measure. He threw himself into his new role with enthusiasm, eager to prove his worth and maintain the lifestyle to which he was quickly becoming accustomed. Their physical relationship was passionate and adventurous, with Jennifer introducing Ryan to experiences he had never imagined. She pushed his boundaries, always maintaining control, a dynamic that spilled over into other aspects of their relationship. As summer turned to fall, Jennifer and Ryan settled into a rhythm of lavish vacations, social events, and intimate evenings at home. To the outside world, they appeared to be an unconventional but happy couple. However, beneath the surface, the seeds of codependency and obsession were taking root, setting the stage for the turmoil that was to come. The delicate balance of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship began to shift with the arrival of Aria Thornton, a 20-year-old art history major at the local university. Aria entered their lives innocuously enough, as a part-time docent at the Museum of Modern Art. Ryan first encountered Aria during one of his frequent visits to the museum, a habit encouraged by Jennifer to further his art education. Aria was leading a tour group, her passion for the artwork evident in her animated descriptions and insightful commentary. Ryan found himself drawn to her enthusiasm, so different from Jennifer's calculated appreciation of art as a status symbol. After the tour, Ryan approached Aria, engaging her in a discussion about the exhibition. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by shared laughter and a palpable sense of connection. For the first time in months, Ryan felt truly seen for who he was, rather than as an extension of Jennifer. Aria, with her vibrant style and infectious laugh, represented everything that Jennifer was not. Where Jennifer was polished and restrained, Aria was spontaneous and expressive. Her youth and energy resonated with Ryan, reminding him of the pure relationships he had sacrificed for his arrangement with Jennifer. Over the next few weeks, Ryan found himself visiting the museum more frequently, always managing to time his visits with Aria's shifts. Their friendship blossomed quickly, bonding over shared interests in art, music, and philosophy. Aria introduced Ryan to her world of college parties, indie film screenings, and late-night discussions in 24-hour diners. For Ryan, these interactions with Aria and her friends were a breath of fresh air. He rediscovered parts of himself that had been suppressed in his relationship with Jennifer, including his own artistic aspirations. Aria encouraged him to pursue his interest in photography, even gifting him a vintage camera she had found at a flea market. As Ryan spent more time with Aria, he began to question the nature of his relationship with Jennifer. The stark contrast between the genuine connection he felt with Aria and the transactional nature of his arrangement with Jennifer became increasingly apparent. He found himself manufacturing excuses to spend time away from the estate, his thoughts constantly drifting to Aria. Unbeknownst to Ryan, His changing behavior and growing distraction had not gone unnoticed by Jennifer. Her keen instincts, honed by years of corporate maneuvering, sensed a shift in their dynamic. As Ryan pulled away, Jennifer's determination to maintain control over him only intensified, setting the stage for the conflict that would ultimately lead to tragedy. The first signs of trouble were subtle. Jennifer noticed Ryan checking his phone more frequently, his face lighting up at certain messages. He began to spend more time at the museum, citing a newfound passion for contemporary art. While Jennifer initially encouraged this interest, a nagging suspicion began to take root in her mind. One evening, as they prepared for a charity gala, Jennifer casually asked about Ryan's day at the museum. His response was enthusiastic, filled with details about a new exhibition. But it was the mention of Arya, the incredibly knowledgeable docent, that caught Jennifer's attention. The way Ryan's eyes sparkled as he spoke of her set off alarm bells in Jennifer's head. Determined to uncover the truth, Jennifer began to monitor Ryan more closely. She installed a GPS tracker on his phone under the guise of a security upgrade. She hired a private investigator to follow him during his outings. The reports she received confirmed her worst fears. Ryan was spending considerable time with a young woman, their body language indicating a clear attraction. As evidence of Ryan's growing connection with Arya mounted, Jennifer's jealousy festered. She oscillated between icy detachment and clingy desperation, her moods becoming increasingly unpredictable. One moment she would shower Ryan with expensive gifts. The next, she would subject him to passive-aggressive comments and veiled threats. Jennifer's behavior began to affect her professional life as well. She became distracted during important meetings, snapping at employees for minor infractions. Her assistant noticed an increase in her alcohol consumption, often finding empty wine bottles in her office trash. Unable to contain her suspicions any longer, Jennifer confronted Ryan after a particularly late night out. She demanded to know where he had been, accusing him of betraying her trust. Ryan, caught off guard, attempted to downplay his friendship with Arya, insisting that Jennifer was overreacting. The argument escalated quickly, with Jennifer reminding Ryan of everything she had done for him and insinuating that he owed her his loyalty. This confrontation marked a turning point in their relationship. Ryan, feeling trapped and resentful of Jennifer's possessiveness, began to withdraw further. He became more guarded with his phone, careful not to mention Arya, and invented elaborate excuses for his absences. Jennifer, driven by her growing paranoia, intensified her efforts to control Ryan. She insisted on accompanying him to art events, her possessive body language sending a clear message to anyone who approached them. She surprised him with impromptu visits to the museum, her sharp eyes scanning for any sign of the young docent who had captured Ryan's attention. As the weeks wore on, the emotional chasm between Jennifer and Ryan widened. Their once passionate encounters became mechanical, tinged with an undercurrent of resentment. Jennifer's jealousy morphed into an obsession, consuming her thoughts and driving her to increasingly desperate measures to keep Ryan by her side. Little did she know that her possessive love was pushing Ryan further away, steering them both towards a confrontation that would have fatal consequences. As Jennifer's jealousy intensified, she embarked on a calculated campaign to maintain control over Ryan. Drawing on the same strategic thinking that had made her a formidable businesswoman, she deployed a range of manipulation tactics designed to keep Ryan dependent on her and isolated from Arya's influence. Jennifer's first move was to exploit Ryan's financial dependence. She began to withhold his allowance, citing fictitious issues with her accounts or claiming she needed to reallocate funds for business purposes. When Ryan expressed concern, she would relent, but not before extracting promises of increased commitment and time spent together. Emotional manipulation became Jennifer's primary weapon. She oscillated between lavishing Ryan with affection and subjecting him to prolonged periods of icy silence. This hot and cold treatment left Ryan constantly off balance, never sure where he stood. Jennifer also employed more subtle tactics to isolate Ryan from potential support systems. She scheduled trips that conveniently coincided with plans Ryan had made with friends. She expressed concern about his old acquaintances, implying they were a bad influence or simply using him for his newfound status. Gradually, Ryan's social circle shrank, leaving Jennifer as his primary source of companionship and validation. In moments of perceived threat, Jennifer would remind Ryan of all she had done for him, framing her controlling behavior as acts of love and generosity. She'd recount how she had rescued him from a life of poverty and obscurity, implying that without her, he would be nothing. These guilt trips served to reinforce Ryan's sense of obligation and indebtedness to Jennifer. As Ryan continued to pull out, Jennifer's tactics grew more desperate. She began to fake health scares, claiming stress-induced migraines or fainting spells that mysteriously coincided with times Ryan wanted to go out alone. Her performance was so convincing that Ryan often canceled his plans out of genuine concern for her well-being. Through this web of manipulation, Jennifer sought to create a reality where Ryan believed he needed her, where his autonomy was slowly eroded until staying with her seemed like the only viable option. Yet, with each manipulative act, she was pushing Ryan closer to his breaking point, fueling a resentment that would soon boil over with devastating consequences. During one of her clandestine investigations into Ryan's past, Jennifer uncovered a secret that she believed would give her the ultimate leverage. Through her network of private investigators, she learned that Ryan had been involved in a car accident during his freshman year of college. The accident had resulted in a serious injury to another student, but Ryan had fled the scene in a panic. The case had gone cold due to lack of evidence, but Jennifer now held the missing pieces. Armed with this explosive information, Jennifer carefully planned her approach. She waited for a moment when Ryan was particularly vulnerable, after a heated argument about his increasing absences. As Ryan turned to leave, Jennifer calmly mentioned the accident. The color drained from Ryan's face as he slowly turned back to her. Jennifer laid out the facts with cold precision. Producing police reports, she made it clear that she possessed enough evidence to reopen the case and implicate Ryan. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. If Ryan didn't comply with her wishes, she would turn the information over to the authorities. The revelation shattered Ryan. The accident had been the catalyst for his downward spiral in college. The guilt eating away at him for years. He had convinced himself that by leaving his old life behind, he could escape his past. Now that illusion was cruelly stripped away. Jennifer pressed her advantage, presenting Ryan with a choice. He could recommit to their relationship, cut all ties with Arya, and follow Jennifer's rules to the letter. Or she would expose his secret, ruining his life and possibly sending him to prison. Trapped and desperate, Ryan initially agreed to Jennifer's demands. He stopped visiting the museum, ignored Arya's increasingly worried messages, and became a virtual prisoner in Jennifer's gilded cage. Jennifer reveled in her victory, believing she had finally secured Ryan's unwavering loyalty. However, the weight of the blackmail soon began to take its toll on both of them. Ryan became withdrawn and depressed, his once vibrant personality dulled by the constant stress of living under threat. He went through the motions of their relationship, but the spark that had initially drawn Jennifer to him was extinguished. Jennifer, for her part, found that her victory left her feeling hollow. The passionate, challenging young man she had fallen for was replaced by a submissive shell. She vacillated between guilt over her actions and frustration at Ryan's listlessness. As weeks passed, the tension in the household became unbearable. Ryan's resentment simmered just below the surface, while Jennifer's paranoia grew. She became convinced that Ryan was plotting against her, looking for a way to neutralize her leverage. The situation was untenable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark would come in the form of a chance encounter that would push Ryan to his limits and set in motion the final fatal confrontation between him and Jennifer. The catalyst for the final confrontation came on a crisp autumn evening. Jennifer had dragged Ryan to a gallery opening, parading him before her peers like a prized possession. As they moved through the crowd, Ryan's eyes locked with a familiar face across the room. It was Arya, looking striking in a vintage dress, her presence a stark reminder of the freedom and genuine connection he had lost. Before Jennifer could react, Ryan mumbled an excuse and fled the gallery. He found himself wandering the streets, his mind racing. The chance encounter with Arya had awakened something in him, a fierce desire for freedom, a reminder of the person he once was and could be again. When Ryan finally returned to the estate in the early hours of the morning, he found Jennifer waiting for him, her face a mask of cold fury. The argument that ensued was unlike any they had before. Ryan, emboldened by his realization and no longer willing to be controlled, confronted Jennifer about her manipulation and blackmail. Jennifer, sensing she was losing her grip on Ryan, resorted to her final play. She reminded him of the evidence she held, threatening not only to expose his past, but to use her influence to destroy any future he might hope to have. She painted a vivid picture of the ruin that awaited him if he dared to leave her. But instead of cowing Ryan, her threats only served to strengthen his resolve. In a moment of clarity, he realized that no future with Jennifer, no matter how luxurious, was worth the price of his soul. With a calmness that belied the turmoil within him, Ryan told Jennifer that he was leaving, regardless of the consequences. Jennifer, faced with the reality of losing Ryan despite her best efforts, snapped. What happened next would shock the community and change both their lives forever. As Ryan turned to leave, Jennifer's composure shattered completely. With a primal scream of rage and desperation, she lunged at him, her manicured nails raking across his face. Ryan, caught off guard by the sudden violence, stumbled backward, knocking over an antique vase that shattered on the marble floor. The sound of breaking porcelain seemed to push Jennifer further into a frenzy. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the bar cart and swung it at Ryan's head. He ducked, the decanter missing him by inches and smashing against the wall, showering them both with glass and expensive scotch. Ryan, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to restrain Jennifer, pleading with her to calm down. But Jennifer was beyond reason. She clawed at him, kicking and screaming incoherently about betrayal and ingratitude. In the struggle, they careened into Jennifer's prized art collection, paintings crashing to the floor around them. As they grappled, Jennifer's hand closed around a letter opener on her desk, a wicked, ornate thing that was more weapon than office tool. She plunged it toward Ryan's chest. He managed to deflect the blow, but the blade sliced deeply into his arm, drawing a spray of blood. The sight of blood seemed to momentarily snap Jennifer back to reality. She staggered back, the letter opener falling from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Ryan, clutching his bleeding arm, saw an opportunity to escape and made a dash for the door. But Jennifer, in a final desperate act, grabbed his injured arm, yanking him back with surprising strength. Ryan, acting on pure instinct and adrenaline, shoved her away hard. Jennifer stumbled backward, her heel catching on the rug. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her head striking the corner of the heavy marble fireplace with a sickening crack. Jennifer crumpled to the floor, a pool of blood quickly spreading beneath her hair. Ryan stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The room, so recently a scene of chaos, was suddenly terribly still. With trembling hands, Ryan checked for a pulse, finding none. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Jennifer was dead, and his life as he knew it was over. In a daze, he stumbled out of the house into the cool night air, leaving behind a scene of destruction that would soon become the center of a sensational investigation. The grisly discovery was made by Jennifer's housekeeper, Elodia Ramirez, early the next morning. Her screams upon finding her employer's lifeless body shattered the tranquil morning silence of Riverton, bringing neighbors running and prompting a flurry of calls to 911. Detective Lydia Blackwell, a veteran of the Riverton Police Department's Homicide Division, arrived at the scene within the hour. The opulent living room, now a tableau of violence, told a story of a fierce struggle. Broken glass crunched under her feet as she made her initial survey, noting the overturned furniture, shattered artifacts, and the smears of blood that led to Jennifer's body by the fireplace. As crime scene technicians swarmed the house, Detective Blackwell began piecing together the events of a previous night. Security camera footage showed Ryan fleeing the premises in the early hours of the morning, his shirt stained with blood. His swift disappearance made him the prime suspect, and an all-points bulletin was issued for his arrest. As the investigation progressed, a more complex picture began to emerge. Interviews with staff and acquaintances revealed the tumultuous nature of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship. Several witnesses reported hearing frequent arguments and expressed concern about Jennifer's increasingly erratic behavior. A breakthrough came when detectives discovered Jennifer's hidden files detailing her investigation into Ryan's past. The evidence of blackmail added a new dimension to the case, suggesting that Ryan might have been acting in desperation rather than cold-blooded murder. Meanwhile, Ryan remained at large. Sightings were reported across the state, but he managed to elude capture. The turning point in the investigation came from an unexpected source. Aria Thornton, racked with guilt over her role in the events, came forward with crucial information. She provided investigators with text messages and voicemails from Ryan, documenting Jennifer's escalating behavior and his growing fear. Aria's testimony painted a picture of Ryan as a victim of manipulation and abuse, trapped in a gilded cage by Jennifer's wealth and threats. This new perspective prompted Detective Blackwell to dig deeper into Jennifer's past, uncovering a pattern of obsessive behavior and allegations of stalking from her previous relationships. Forensic evidence from the crime scene began to corroborate Ryan's version of events. The angle of Jennifer's fatal injury was consistent with an accidental fall, and defensive wounds on her hands suggested she had been the aggressor in the final confrontation. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Jennifer's own digital footprint. A thorough examination of her computers revealed the full extent of her surveillance of Ryan, including GPS tracking data and recordings from hidden cameras in their home. The level of invasion and control shocked even the most seasoned investigators. As the true nature of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship came to light, public opinion began to shift. The narrative of the gold-digging boy toy gave way to a more nuanced understanding of a young man trapped in an abusive situation. Initially charged with second-degree murder, Ryan's case took an unexpected turn. As evidence of Jennifer's manipulation and abuse mounted, the district attorney's office faced increasing pressure to reconsider the charges. After lengthy deliberations and negotiations with Ryan's defense team, the charges were reduced to manslaughter. After weeks of testimony and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Ryan was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, a verdict that acknowledged his role in Jennifer's death, while also recognizing the extenuating circumstances that led to the fatal confrontation. The judge, taking into account Ryan's lack of prior criminal record and the unusual circumstances of the case, sentenced him to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions, some feeling it was too lenient, others arguing that Ryan had already suffered enough. Olivia Prescott was born on a crisp day in 1985, the only child of Eleanor and Harrison Prescott. Growing up in the affluent neighborhood of Larchmont, New York, Olivia's childhood was marked by privilege and high expectations. Her father, a prominent corporate lawyer, and her mother, a respected art curator, instilled in her a strong work ethic and a passion for the finer things in life. From an early age, Olivia showed a keen intellect and a flair for the dramatic. She excelled in her studies at the prestigious Chatsworth Academy, where she was known for her sharp wit and magnetic personality. Her teachers often remarked on her ability to command attention, whether she was delivering a speech in debate club or starring in the school's theatrical productions. Despite her apparent confidence, those closest to Olivia sensed an underlying insecurity, a constant need for validation that stemmed from the pressure to live up to her parents' lofty standards. This drive for perfection would follow her into adulthood, shaping her decisions and relationships in ways she could never have anticipated. Upon graduating university, Olivia faced the daunting task of carving out her own path. With her parents' connections and her own impressive resume, she secured a position at a renowned auction house in New York City. It was here, amidst the glittering world of high-end art and wealthy collectors, that Olivia would meet the man who would become her first husband. Woody Fuller swept into Olivia's life like a whirlwind, all charm and sophistication. 7 years her senior, Woody was already making a name for himself in the world of finance, his boyish good looks and quick wit making him a favorite among New York's elite social circles. Their eyes met across a crowded gallery, and from that moment, it seemed as though fate had brought them together. Their courtship was a whirlwind of passion and shared interests. Woody introduced Olivia to the finer points of wine tasting and the thrill of sailing, while she opened his eyes to the nuances of contemporary art and the joys of spontaneous adventure. They complemented each other perfectly, or so it appeared to the outside world. In the spring of 2010, barely a year after they first met, Woody proposed to Olivia during a romantic getaway to the Amalfi Coast. The wedding, held at the luxurious Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina, was the social event of the season. The early years of their marriage were a blur of exotic vacations, glamorous parties, and professional triumphs. Olivia thrived in her role as a gallerist, opening her own space in Chelsea with Woody's encouragement and financial backing. Meanwhile, Woody's career in investment banking soared, his natural charisma and sharp instincts earning him a reputation as a rising star on Wall Street. However,
As the initial glow of newlywed bliss began to fade, cracks started to appear in their seemingly perfect union. Woody's work hours grew longer, his absences more frequent. Olivia found herself increasingly alone, pouring her energy into her gallery and the charity committees that filled her social calendar. At first, she dismissed the nagging doubts as normal marital growing pains, but as months turned into years, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing from their relationship. The passion that had once burned so brightly between them dimmed to a flicker, replaced by a polite cordiality that felt more like a business partnership than a marriage. By their 5th anniversary, the Fullers had become masters of maintaining appearances. They still attended events together, smiling for the cameras and exchanging pleasantries with friends and colleagues. But behind closed doors, they led separate lives, each silently questioning the choices that had led them to this point of quiet desperation. The facade of marital bliss finally crumbled in the winter of 2016. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a heated argument that spelled the end, but rather a slow, painful realization that they had grown irreparably apart. She broached the subject of divorce with trepidation, half expecting Woody to fight for their relationship. Instead, she was met with a resigned acceptance that spoke volumes about the true state of their union. It seemed that Woody, too, had been contemplating an exit strategy, though neither had found the courage to voice their discontent until that moment. The legal proceedings were surprisingly amicable. Both Olivia and Woody were determined to avoid a public spectacle, agreeing to a generous settlement that left Olivia financially secure and in possession of their Tribeca loft. Friends and family were shocked by the news, having bought into the illusion of the perfect couple. For Olivia, the divorce brought a mix of relief and profound sadness. While she felt liberated from the constraints of a loveless marriage, she also mourned the death of her youthful dreams and expectations. The failure of her marriage felt like a personal defeat, a blemish on her otherwise meticulously curated life. As the ink dried on the divorce papers, Olivia found herself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The life she had so carefully constructed lay in ruins around her, and for the first time in her adult life she had no clear path forward. Little did she know that this period of upheaval would set the stage for a series of events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. In the aftermath of her divorce, Olivia embarked on a journey of self-discovery and healing. She threw herself into therapy, confronting the deep-seated insecurities and fears that had plagued her throughout her life. Through this process, she began to understand the patterns that had led her into an unfulfilling marriage and vowed to break free from them. Seeking a fresh start, Olivia sold her gallery and took a sabbatical from the art world. She traveled extensively, losing herself in the vibrant markets of Marrakech, the serene temples of Kyoto, and the rugged beauty of the Scottish Highlands. Each destination peeled away another layer of the persona she had constructed, revealing the authentic Olivia that had long been buried beneath societal expectations and personal doubts. As she approached her 33rd birthday, Olivia found herself in a place of contentment she had never known before. She had cultivated a close-knit circle of friends, rediscovered her love for painting, and even adopted a rescue dog named Fitzgerald. Her life was full, and for the first time she felt no pressure to conform to anyone else's vision of success or happiness. It was in this state of newfound self-assurance that Olivia attended a gala for her nonprofit. She had no way of knowing that this event would mark the beginning of a new romance, one that would ultimately lead her down a path she could never have foreseen, toward a future fraught with passion, betrayal, and unthinkable tragedy. The annual gala was in full swing, the grand ballroom of the Museum of Art alive with the chatter of New York's philanthropic elite. Olivia, resplendent in a midnight blue gown, was in her element, moving from group to group with ease, championing her cause with passion and charm. It was during a lull in the evening, as she paused by a display of student artwork, that she first laid eyes on Paul Fisher. Paul stood out in the crowd, his tall, athletic frame lending him an air of distinguished maturity. Unlike many of the attendees who seemed more interested in being seen than in the art itself, Paul was intently studying a painting, his brow furrowed in concentration. Intrigued, Olivia approached him, curious to hear his thoughts on the piece. What followed was a conversation that flowed effortlessly from art criticism to philosophy, punctuated by moments of laughter and shared observations. Paul, she learned, was a professor of literature, with a keen interest in the intersection of visual and written storytelling. As the evening wore on,
Olivia found herself increasingly drawn to Paul's quiet confidence and intellectual depth. He lacked the polished veneer of the financial world she had grown accustomed to, instead exuding a genuine warmth and curiosity that she found refreshing. When he asked for her number at the end of the night, Olivia felt a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. Their courtship progressed rapidly, fueled by a shared passion for the arts and a deep emotional connection that took both of them by surprise. Paul was unlike anyone Olivia had ever dated, thoughtful, nurturing, and unafraid to show vulnerability. He encouraged her artistic pursuits, often reading poetry aloud as she painted in her studio. Within 6 months, they were practically inseparable. Paul proposed on a crisp autumn evening in Central Park, presenting Olivia with a vintage emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Overcome with emotion and certainty, Olivia said yes without hesitation. The whirlwind romance culminated in an intimate winter wedding at the New York Public Library, surrounded by their closest friends and family. As they exchanged vows beneath the ornate ceilings of the Rosemane reading room, Olivia felt she had finally found her true partner, someone who understood and appreciated her for who she truly was. Little did she know that this moment of perfect happiness was merely the calm before a storm that would shatter her world and challenge everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and the capacity for betrayal. The first year of Olivia and Paul's marriage was a blissful honeymoon phase. They settled into a spacious brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn, blending their lives and possessions with the excitement of newlyweds. Weekends were spent exploring the city's hidden gems, attending literary events, and hosting intimate dinner parties for their eclectic group of friends. Olivia's nonprofit flourished under her renewed energy and vision, while Paul received a prestigious grant to write a book on the influence of visual arts on 20th century literature. They supported each other's endeavors wholeheartedly, creating a partnership that seemed to embody the ideal of modern marriage. As they settled into a routine, subtle changes began to emerge. Paul, once so attentive and present, started spending more time in his study, citing the pressures of his book deadline. Olivia, while understanding, couldn't shake a creeping sense of déjà vu. Memories of all surfacing unbidden. She pushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the positives. Unlike her first marriage, she and Paul still shared moments of genuine connection, deep conversations over morning coffee, spontaneous walks in Prospect Park, tender moments of physical intimacy. These reassurances kept her doubts at bay, at least for a time. Yet as their second anniversary approached, Olivia couldn't ignore the growing distance between them. Paul's absences became more frequent, his explanations more vague. He spoke enthusiastically about a new research partner, a fellow professor named Julian, but was oddly reticent about introducing Olivia to his colleague. Determined not to repeat the mistakes of her past, Olivia tried to address her concerns openly. Paul listened attentively, assuring her that nothing was amiss, that he was simply caught up in his work. As winter gave way to spring, Olivia found herself at a crossroads. Should she trust in the strength of their relationship, or listen to the nagging voice of suspicion growing louder in her mind? Little did she know, her decision to seek the truth would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to an unthinkable tragedy. The seeds of suspicion, once planted, grew rapidly in the fertile soil of Olivia's mind. She began to notice small inconsistencies in Paul's behavior, hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when she entered the room, unexplained charges on their joint credit card, the faint scent of an unfamiliar cologne clinging to his clothes. At first, Olivia tried to rationalize these observations. Paul was under immense pressure with his book, she told herself. The strange charges were probably research materials. The cologne, perhaps a sample from a department store. But as the anomalies accumulated, she found it increasingly difficult to silence the voice of doubt. One rainy afternoon, while Paul was supposedly at a faculty meeting, Olivia received a call from his department secretary asking if he was feeling better. Confused, Olivia played along, her heart racing as she realized Paul had lied about his whereabouts. This incident became the catalyst for her decision to investigate further. With a mixture of guilt and determination, Olivia began to delve into Paul's life. She scrutinized his schedule, noting patterns in his absences. She pored over phone records, discovering frequent calls to an unknown number. She even went so far as to follow him one evening, watching from a distance as he met a man in a nondescript sedan, their interaction brief, but charged with an intimacy that made her stomach churn. As the evidence mounted, Olivia found herself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness. The parallels to her first marriage were unmistakable, yet this time the pain cut deeper. She had opened herself completely to Paul, believing she had finally found true partnership and understanding. Torn between confronting Paul and gathering more proof, Olivia retreated into herself. She threw herself into her work, using her non-profit as a shield against the turmoil in her personal life. Friends noticed her withdrawal, the shadows under her eyes, but she deflected their concerns with practiced ease. Little did Olivia know that her world was about to be shattered in a way she could never have imagined, as the truth she sought would prove far more shocking and devastating than she ever anticipated. On a sweltering July afternoon, Olivia's suspicions reached a fever pitch. Paul had claimed to be attending a weekend literature conference in Boston, but a casual conversation with a colleague revealed no such event was taking place. Heart pounding, palms sweating, Olivia made a decision that would alter the course of her life irrevocably. She followed Paul to a discreet boutique hotel in the West Village, her mind racing with possibilities, each more painful than the last. As she watched him enter the lobby, a familiar figure caught her eye, a man with the confident stride and impeccable suit she knew all too well. It was Woody, her ex-husband, following closely behind Paul. Shock gave way to disbelief as Olivia processed the scene before her. Could it be a coincidence? A chance encounter between her current and former husband? But the furtive glances, the subtle touch of hands as they walked, told a different story. With trembling hands, Olivia followed them into the hotel, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Using a combination of charm and a hastily concocted story about a surprise for her husband, Olivia managed to convince a sympathetic desk clerk to reveal the room number. She stood outside room 507, frozen in indecision, the muffled sounds of conversation seeping through the door. Taking a deep breath, Olivia knocked. The voices inside fell silent. Moments later, Paul opened the door, his face draining of color as he registered Olivia's presence. Behind him, Woody sat on the edge of the bed, shirt unbuttoned, a look of panic etched across his features. The scene before her confirmed Olivia's worst fears, and then some. Not only was Paul having an affair, but he was having it with her ex-husband. The two men she had loved and trusted most in the world had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. Time seemed to stand still as the three of them stared at each other, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. Olivia felt as though she were watching the scene unfold from outside her body, her mind struggling to process the reality of what she was witnessing. It was Woody who broke the silence, his voice hoarse as he uttered her name. "Olivia, I can explain." But there was no explanation that could soften the blow of this betrayal. With a strangled cry, Olivia turned and fled, leaving behind the shattered remains of her trust and the two men who had destroyed it. The days following Olivia's discovery were a blur of pain, anger, and confusion. She shut herself away in their brownstone, ignoring the incessant calls and messages from both Paul and Woody. It wasn't until a week later that she finally agreed to meet with Paul, her emotions having coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. They met at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, far from their usual haunts. Paul arrived looking haggard, his usual polished appearance marred by days of obvious distress. Olivia, by contrast, was the picture of composure, her face a mask of controlled calm. Paul launched into an explanation, his words tumbling out in a desperate flood. He spoke of a chance encounter with Woody at a literary event, of a connection he couldn't explain or resist. He swore it had started innocently, just two men bonding over their shared history with Olivia, but had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Olivia listened in stony silence, her mind reeling with the implications of his confession. How long had this been going on? How could they have done this to her? Paul pleaded for understanding, for forgiveness, insisting that his love for Olivia was real despite his transgression. But Olivia was beyond understanding. The double betrayal had shattered something fundamental within her. She demanded to know if Woody had known about their marriage from the beginning, if this had all been some cruel joke at her expense. Paul's hesitation before answering told Olivia everything she needed to know. The realization that both men had entered into this affair with full knowledge of its impact on her was the final straw. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, drawing curious glances from other patrons. "I want a divorce," she stated flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. "And I never want to see or hear from either of you again." With those words, Olivia walked out of the cafe and out of Paul's life, leaving him calling after her, his pleas falling on deaf ears. In the weeks that followed, Olivia's world spiraled into chaos. She threw herself into her work with a frantic energy, using it as a shield against the pain and betrayal that threatened to consume her. Her friends worried, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the brittleness of her smile. But Olivia rebuffed all attempts at comfort or intervention. Paul continued his campaign for reconciliation, alternating between heartfelt apologies and impassioned declarations of love. Woody, too, reached out, seeking to explain his role in the affair. Their persistent efforts only served to fuel Olivia's growing anger and resentment. One rainy evening, as Olivia sat alone in her darkened living room, a bottle of wine her only companion, something inside her snapped. The carefully constructed facade of control crumbled, leaving raw, unbridled emotion in its wake. In a frenzy, she began to destroy the remnants of her life with Paul, shredding photographs, smashing mementos, her anguished cries echoing through the empty house. It was in this state that she discovered the gun, a small .38 revolver Paul kept locked in his desk for protection. As she held the weapon, feeling its weight and cold metal against her skin, a dangerous calm settled over her. For the first time since the revelation, Olivia felt a sense of power, of control over her situation. The next morning, operating on autopilot, Olivia dressed with meticulous care. She applied her makeup with precision, donned her favorite silk blouse, and slipped the gun into her handbag. She had made a decision, though its full implications had yet to register in her conscious mind. Olivia drove to the familiar address of Woody's penthouse apartment, where she knew both men would be. She had overheard Paul arranging the meeting in one of his many voicemails, a final attempt to sort things out between the three of them. The irony of returning to the home she had once shared with Woody was not lost on her. As she rode the elevator to the top floor, Olivia's mind was eerily quiet. Gone were the swirling thoughts of betrayal and pain, replaced by a singular focus on the task at hand. She didn't know exactly what she planned to do, but she knew with certainty that after today, everything would change. The elevator doors opened, and Olivia stepped out, her hand closing around the cold metal in her purse as she approached the apartment door. The luxurious penthouse, once a symbol of Olivia's past life with Woody, now became the stage for a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Olivia entered without knocking, finding Paul and Woody deep in conversation in the living room. Their faces registered shock, then fear, as they took in Olivia's wild-eyed appearance and the gun now gripped tightly in her trembling hand. What happened next was a blur of shouting, pleading, and chaos. Woody attempted to reason with Olivia, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Paul moved towards her, perhaps hoping to disarm her. The first shot rang out, catching Woody in the chest and sending him stumbling backwards over an antique coffee table. Paul froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Olivia, don't do this." But Olivia was beyond words, beyond reason. The second and third shots hit Paul in rapid succession, his body crumpling to the floor beside the man he had chosen over her. As the echo of gunshots faded, an eerie silence descended upon the room. Olivia stood motionless, the gun still raised, smoke curling from its barrel. The magnitude of what she had done slowly began to penetrate the fog of rage and betrayal that had driven her to this point. She looked down at the bodies of the two men she had once loved, their lifeblood staining the plush white carpet. The gun slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. In the distance, she could hear the wail of approaching sirens, a neighbor no doubt having called the police upon hearing the gunshots. Olivia made no attempt to flee. She sank to her knees, her mind struggling to process the horrific scene before her, as she waited for the authorities to arrive and bring an end to this nightmarish chapter of her life. The police arrived within minutes, bursting into the apartment with weapons drawn. They found Olivia kneeling on the floor, her once immaculate blouse now spattered with blood, her eyes vacant and unfocused. She offered no resistance as they handcuffed her and led her away, responding to their questions with an eerie calmness that unnerved even the most seasoned officers. The crime scene investigators swarmed the apartment, meticulously documenting every detail of the gruesome tableau. Forensic experts collected blood samples, retrieved bullet casings, and photographed the victims' positions. The murder weapon, still lying where Olivia had dropped it, was carefully bagged and tagged as evidence. At the police station, Olivia was processed and placed in an interrogation room. Detective Elaine Samuels, a veteran of the NYPD's Homicide Division, took charge of the case. She observed Olivia through the one-way mirror, noting the suspect's composed demeanor, a stark contrast to the violent act she had just committed. During the initial questioning, Olivia was surprisingly forthcoming. She recounted the events leading up to the shooting with a detachment that bordered on clinical, as if she were describing a movie she had watched rather than actions she had taken. "Yes, I shot them. They betrayed me. They deserved it." Detective Samuels probed deeper, trying to understand the motivations behind the crime. As Olivia spoke about discovering the affair between her current and ex-husband, flashes of emotion began to break through her calm exterior. Anger, pain, and a profound sense of betrayal colored her words, providing glimpses into the psychological turmoil that had driven her to murder. As the interrogation progressed, Samuels built a timeline of events, corroborating Olivia's story with evidence collected from the crime scene and witness statements from neighbors and friends. The picture that emerged was one of a woman pushed to the brink by an unthinkable betrayal, her actions born of temporary insanity rather than premeditated malice. By the end of that long night, Olivia Prescott Fisher was formally charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. As she was led to a holding cell, the full weight of her actions finally seemed to hit her, and she began to weep uncontrollably. The arrest of Olivia, once a respected figure in New York's art and philanthropy circles, sent shockwaves through the city. Olivia's defense team, led by renowned criminal attorney, quickly began building their case. They argued for a plea of not guilty by reason of temporary insanity, citing the extreme emotional distress caused by the discovery of the affair. Psychiatric evaluations were ordered, and experts were brought in to testify about the psychological impact of such a profound betrayal. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They argued that Olivia's actions were premeditated, pointing to her deliberate acquisition of the gun and her journey to confront the victims. They characterized her as a woman scorned, driven by jealousy and a desire for revenge rather than temporary madness. As the trial approached, public opinion was divided. Some saw Olivia as a sympathetic figure, a victim pushed too far by the cruel actions of those she trusted most. Others viewed her as a cold-blooded killer who had taken the law into her own hands. The courtroom became a battleground of conflicting narratives. Character witnesses were called, painting contrasting pictures of Olivia's personality and state of mind. Former colleagues praised her dedication and compassion, while acquaintances of Paul and Woody spoke of a woman prone to jealousy and possessiveness. Throughout the proceedings, Olivia sat quietly at the defense table, her face a mask of composed sorrow. She seemed a far cry from the successful, vivacious woman she had once been. The weight of her actions etched in the lines of her face and the dullness of her once bright eyes. Olivia was found guilty of manslaughter, a lesser charge than the original murder accusations. The judge, taking into account Olivia's previously unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the crime, sentenced her to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. As the verdict was read, Olivia stood stoically, her composure finally cracking as the reality of her future set in. She was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, leaving behind a gallery of stunned spectators and a society grappling with the tragic consequences of betrayal and uncontrolled emotion. In the end, the story of Olivia served as a somber reflection on the complexities of human relationships, the devastating power of betrayal, and the thin line that separates civilized behavior from primal instinct.